1 second. Okay, now we're then live on YouTube as well. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are very delighted and honored to host our experts from the RIPE community today, and they're going to give us some presentations, technical presentations about the internet and its governance today. I would like to express my gratitude to our friends at RIPE. Gergana, I guess, will introduce our experts on the topic. And it's a great pleasure to host you here today at Middle East Technical University. The floor is yours. Thank you very much for everything and for the organization.
Thank you so much. My name is Gergana Petrova. I'm here with my colleagues Hisham Ibrahim and Shafiq Chaya. We are working for Ripe-NCC, which is the regional internet registry for Europe, Middle East, and parts of Central Asia. So we have 3 hours scheduled for today. We're going to start with 3 presentations from Hisham. So he's going to talk about IPv6 routing and security. Then it's going to be me. I'm going to talk about the Ripe-NCC, what the organization does, and about the RIPE database. I'm going to talk about the lockdown effect on internet traffic, that especially the one that we observed last year, and about internet governance. And then my colleague Shafiq is going to tell you a little bit about some facts and figures about the internet. So that's a super short introduction. Hisham, I will give you the floor to start. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gergana. Thank you, Ertan, and thank you all for joining. Yeah, I'll jump into the presentation right away. While I'm pulling it up, my name is Hisham Ibrahim. I work for the Ripe-NCC. I've been working there for the past almost 7 years now. I'm part of the team that does community development, and we do a lot of these kind of either academic sessions or engagement with different stakeholders in the community. But you're going to be hearing more about that from Gergana and Shafiq. Just checking, you can see my slides, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So yes, this is a talk that we regularly do at the various universities. Gergana is very well connected when it comes to the academic world, and she helps us get in contact with either undergrad or postgrad students through various projects that I'm sure she's going to be talking about. But this is one of them, the Internet 101. Kind of a thing. And just to let you guys know, I'm very open and actually looking forward to a lot of questions. So please feel free to ask questions, put comments. If you feel I'm going too fast or want me to go back to anything, just let me know. We have enough time to cover this to your content. So jumping in, what is the internet, right? We usually just kind of like draw this cloud when we want to talk about connecting to the internet. And for a lot of people, they were just assuming that, and actually that was even before the word cloud became mainstream. But in reality, you guys know, because you have a technical background, the internet isn't just this one big cloud or network. It's actually a large number of networks that are interconnected together that form what we casually call as the internet. These networks, or going a little bit more technical, autonomous systems, are very highly interconnected, which is why it's called the internet. And each one of these autonomous systems or networks are identified by an autonomous system number that uniquely identifies that. And it speaks to what kind of routing policies that they apply, what kind of resources are they advertising, how are they dealing with their traffic, who has rights to pass through some of their filters or not, or how do they actually manage, who do they connect with and how do they not, how do they send their traffic, and all the other stuff. through various mechanisms, but you need an autonomous system number to identify your network. If you don't have one, you are seen as part of the network that you get your service from. So for example, and I'm not really familiar with the setup at your university, if your university does not have its own autonomous system number, you would be seen as the part of the network of your provider. So that could be, I don't know, Super Online or Turk Telecom or whomever it is. Or if you have in your country an NREN, a university and research network, you would be seen part of that network. However, if you do have your own ASN, then your network would be uniquely identified as your own. And we do see a lot of universities that have their own ASNs, banks, enterprise, and of course, ISPs. So the internet today, when we talk a little bit more about what the internet actually is, the internet is roughly 60,000 autonomous system networks that are interconnected. In Turkey today, there's more than 500 plus visible ASNs on the routing table. So digging a little bit deeper, identifiers, right? And I know you're technical, so I'm going to brush through this. But if you want me to go over it again, just let me know. The internet was founded on a concept very similar to the post service. So in a postal service, you would write a letter and put that letter in an envelope. And on that envelope, you would write two addresses. You would write the address of where you want that envelope to be delivered, and you would write on the envelope also the address of the sender. That is exactly how the internet works. The letter itself would be the payload that you're trying to transmit. The envelope is the packet that you're putting your payload in. And on each packet, there needs to be two addresses. One that identifies where it's going, the destination, the receiver address, and one that identifies who sent it, the sender address. And the reason why you need to have these two addresses, well, the sender address, the receiver address is quite obvious, so that it knows where it goes to. But the sender address is in case that either the envelope or the packets are not do not reach their destination. You can notify back the sender. You can actually send that back and let them know who that is. And even if it does, for you to be able to send back something like an acknowledgement, you need to know where that it was originated from. So this brings us to talking a little bit more about internet number resources. And the Ripe-NCC, the organization that both Gergana, Shafiq, and myself work at, is the regional internet registry for Europe, Middle East, and parts of Central Asia. What we do is we do a lot of different things related to internet, but one of the primary functions that we serve as is the registry, and we manage these internet resources for our service region. So going back to the internet numbers, basically, if you have two devices that want to talk to each other, devices are, you all know, they speak zeros and ones, right? They speak binary. So the addresses would actually look like this. They would have a string of zeros and ones that should identify these different devices. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like for them to be able to communicate. However, we as human beings, when we look at this kind of stream of zeros and ones, we get confused. We can't really memorize them. So we turn it into something else. We turn it into a decimal base because we have 10 fingers, and we identify more with the decimal system rather than the binary system. So the IP addresses would end up looking something like this. And again, this is something that I'm sure you're all familiar with and have seen multiple times. And this would allow these devices to be able to identify a sender and receiver when they're transmitting packets back and forth. Now, this version of IP addresses is called IP version 4. It got initially deployed in the early 80s. It's roughly 4.2 billion IP addresses. And again, the reason behind that is it's a string of 32 bits. So, and because it's binary, so it would be that the number of permutations would be 2 to the power 32, which is roughly 4.2 billion IP addresses. Now, not all of these could be used, and there's stuff to be said there. Some of it was reserved for future use, some of them were reserved for documentation, and other stuff like that. But primarily today, what is used on the internet, the most common used IP scheme on the internet is the IP version 4 addresses. Now, IP version 6, the thing is, back in early on, back in the 90s, even before the internet exploded the way that it did and started being part of our everyday life with multiple devices connecting to it and multiple services running all in real time concurrently. The people that were managing these resources were seeing that they are a finite number of resources and they're running out very quickly. And there needed to be a way to actually sustain that growth of the internet that they were seeing. Today, the world is roughly, I think, 8 billion people, if I'm not mistaken. Could be a little bit less. But as you saw, the maximum number of IP addresses is 4 billion. So there's no way of it actually scaling to be able to connect every single human being. And again, we're just talking about humans. Individuals usually have multiple devices. I have my phone that's connected. I have my laptop that I'm using to talk to you with, looking around my home where I'm talking to you from. There's a PlayStation connected to my Wi-Fi device. There's a printer, and each one of these requires an IPTV. They all require IP addresses. So just as one individual in one household, I have multiple IPs that I'm using. You can add on top of that stuff like, IP addresses used in infrastructure for the ISPs, or IPs used for DNS and others. And then you will find out very quickly that the IP version 4 addresses are not enough. And like I said, this is something that they figured out back in the 90s. So there were a few calls to try to come up with a new version of IP, which they did, which is called IP version 6. So IP version 6, as you can see here in the slide, is basically IP version 4 on steroids. IP version 4 was 32 bits. This is 128 bits. So you can see how long the binary version of it is compared to the other one, which looked like this. You can also see that there's differences in the ways that it's represented. So it's not represented in decimal anymore, as much as we like decimal, because it was just too big to represent in a decimal sense and to memorize. So people ended up doing it in hexadecimal, and still even big. So with hexa, you end up with your typical from 0 to 9, the decimal stuff, but then you add on top of that A, B, C, D, E, and F, which represent a 10 till 15 in the hexa system, plus 0, of course, if I have it mentioned. This is where you can end up starting seeing stuff like in the addresses in front of you, BD, for example, or other characters that represent hexadecimal numbers. You can also see that they changed the dots to columns. And yeah, the address just looks a little bit different. However, the purpose is still the same. The purpose is to identify where the source and destination addresses are, so that the packets can move back and forth. So when people start talking about, well, what are the advantages of deploying IP version 6? As a functionality, IP version 6 does exactly what IP version 4 does. And I know that there have been people marketing and saying, but it's better for this and it's better for that. At the end of the day, IP version 6's function, primary function, which it exists to serve, is identifying the source and destination, and it does that similar to IP version 4. Now, the advantage that it has over v4 is it is much longer, meaning that it can allow for a lot more IP addresses to be identified and devices to be connected. I think the number is 340 trillion devices. That may come up in one of the slides. Yes, here it is. So looking at V4 and V6, like I said, the comparison is that V6 has a lot more IP addresses. In fact, it's so much that not all of them are even put at use at this point in time. They're divided into 8 different groups. They're only using 1/8 of these resources, and the rest are just to see if what will happen with these amounts of resources and how we can actually better utilize them. There's one story that I always like to tell when I talk about this is one version of these stories is like when we start colonizing new planets, we will require to connect them to the internet as well, and we can use IP version 6 to interconnect 7 additional planets to Earth and its network. So yeah, there's that for the science fiction guys. And as you can see in the address, you would see stuff like, at the bottom, you would see stuff like B, D, A, and E, like I said, the hexa. You would see columns, and sometimes a column, which is just a shorthand for, instead of writing zeros, you can put in a column, and the device auto fills that with zeros. Now, you can only use that once in address, because if you have 2 of those, then the device will not know how many zeros are on each side. So for the people the naysayers that think that IP version 6 isn't happening, these are graphs from multiple content providers all over the world. The top 2 are from Google, the green ones, and they represent how much V6 unique users addresses are they seeing. And you can see that, so to give you a very quick rough history here, there is a central pool called the IANA pool that acts as the main reservoir for all of the unallocated IP addresses, whether it's V4 or V6. And that reservoir used to give the 5 regional internet registries the resources. Sorry, Gergana used to give an intro before this talk that spoke to these, so I don't have a slide for them, but I'll walk you through them, and I think Gergana will touch on this on her slides as well afterwards. So, the Ripe-NCC is one of 5 regional internet registries. So that main reservoir, the IANA, gives 5 organizations, each one responsible for roughly a continent. One of them responsible for Africa, one of them responsible for North America, one is responsible for Latin America and the Caribbean, one responsible for the Asia Pacific, and we, the Ripe-NCC, are the ones that serve and are responsible for managing the resources of Europe, Middle East, and Central Asia. So what happened back in 2011 is that main reservoir, it used to give out big blocks of /8s, roughly 16 million IP addresses. It ran out of these big continuous blocks in 2011. 2012, APNIC, the one that serves the Asia Pacific region, and 2011, APNIC ran out. 2012, Ripe-NCC ran out of IP addresses as well. Well, when I say run out, there's a lot of to be said there. But again, like we hit a final /8, which means the policies that we apply to distributing IP addresses have changed. Before that, you could request as many resources as you can, and if you can justify them, you could get them. After that, it became a scarce resource, and you could only get a small chunk of IP addresses. It was around 1,000 IP addresses, and now I think it's down to 250. So this is why you can see that on the timeline that you see on the top left there, where from 2012 all the way to 2012, there wasn't much happening with V6, right? There was enough V4, people were happy, why do we need to bother with a new one? Once scarcity happened, as any market you would expect to see, people started adopting the new thing because it was better for them and cheaper on the long run, and it made more sense for them to grow and scale. So since 2012, you can see that there's been a steady growth of V6. Today, I think it's roughly around 30%, if I'm not mistaken, give or take, depending on how you look at it and measure it. But at least 1/3 of what you can see at Google's level is now being served over IP version 6. You can see the heat map over there. The darker green colors, or the darker colors in general, represent more dense V6 users. So you can see green is Google, blue is Facebook, and orange is Akamai. And as you can see, there are big chunks of the world that have V6, and they're doing it all the way to the end user level. Doing it at the ISP level isn't enough anymore. So you can see countries like the US with a lot of V6 happening, Brazil, Australia. You can see parts of the Middle East that are also doing this. Turkey, not that high when it comes to V6. We can maybe discuss that a little bit more during the discussion part. But yeah, Europe, a lot of V6 happening, and it is happening today. So for those of you that tell you there is no V6 online today, they are horribly mistaken. And again, the three that I'm mentioning here, Google, Facebook, Akamai, they are some of the bigger providers, and others like Cloudflare, like who else? All the bigger players, all the bigger Netflixes of the world, the others, all have V6 addresses and are V6 capable. The problem, and these are the ones that have the biggest amount of traffic. So if you look at it traffic-wise, the bigger players are all already with V6. The problem is with the long tail. The problem is with the smaller content providers that do not have V6. So I don't know about your university website. If it's not on V6, then it's part of the, let's say, problem, the long tail that doesn't have V6, that people use as an excuse, saying, well, they don't have V6, so there's not V6 happening on the world. I'll pause for a bit of questions before I go into this. If anybody has any remarks, questions, wants to discuss anything before I go on. Questions, comments? Yeah? Nothing?
I don't see anything in the chat.
Okay. Well, so this one is a bit of a freebie just to warm you guys up, but I will really much appreciate if you guys have questions, thoughts, comments, if you want me to go over something again or anything like that. But I'll move along with the slides, and then we can see from there. So going back to the slides is the topic of names. So as we covered, let me also ask very quickly, is this, I'm guessing all this is not new, right? I'm guessing all this is information you already had, right? Feedback. Ertan, would you know?
Most of the participants are graduate students, so they have taken some courses on networking and they know these topics, okay. I guess. So these are not new concepts.
Good, good. Yeah, I just wanted to double check. The more interesting stuff is still yet to happen, but yeah, and I see a couple comments here from people saying, yes, they've heard about this, so I'm happy with that.
Okay. Before going any further, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Regarding this IPv6 statistics, you have to have some support from the routers, right?
You have to have support?
From the routers, from the infrastructure as well, right?
Well, so yes, so as any device that is connected, it needs to be able to speak IP, right? And if you have like a home, let me put it this way. And that's a good question to have a bit of a discussion on. Part of the problem that a lot of the service providers claim that they're not doing v6 is because of the support of the devices. So a lot of us have modems and CPEs at home. Probably your device is at least 5-6 years old, if not older. And the service providers use that as a bit of an excuse of saying, well, we cannot deploy IPv6 all the way to the end user because their devices don't support. Now, it's been made a lot easier with these things, the phones that we carry, because you usually have a much shorter turnover when it comes to these phones. So you usually replace your phone once every year, every 2 years. So chances are the device that you're carrying in your hand is v6 capable, versus the CPE that you have in your home. The one that I'm using at my home, I think, is 7 years old now. It does support IPv6. I bought it supporting IPv6, so there were brands that had it at that time. But there are others that may have not looked for v6, that just bought the cheapest modem that they found that may not have that support. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, but I see Hasunu saying we already deployed IPv6 at the university. That's really good to hear. And is it just in a lab somewhere, or do people that connect to the Wi-Fi and students and stuff get v6 addresses? I'm curious to know. Does anybody know? When you connect to the Wi-Fi, do you get a v6 address? So I'll explain. Ertan?
I don't know Hüsnü. I think he's from our computer center. He knows better than I do.
Okay.
About the deployment of IPv6 at the university, right?
Fair enough. The thing is, the reason why I'm asking about that distinction is because of the following, and it's it's relevant to what we're discussing here now. So it's very easy on the router. So let me put it this way: for you to deploy v6, there's a few things that you need to be doing as a network operator, right? You need to get your IPv6 addresses. So you go to the Ripe-NCC or the equivalent of it and request your resources. If you remember, it's a very easy thing to do, and you can also get your ASN and v4 as well while you're doing that. So now that you have your resources, announcing them on a router is also very trivial. It's like 3-4 commands depending on what vendor you're using, and all of a sudden your resources are being advertised to the world. The world knows that if they want to reach this block of v6 addresses, they go to this router. So now your university has the resources, they've deployed it. There's a couple stuff that they also need to be doing, like reverse DNS and a Route 6 object, which has to do with making sure that the traffic and the DNS traffic can actually talk to that block on that network. But once you get that settled, and that's quite easy, it doesn't take you more than, if you know what you're doing, more than an hour tops to get this whole thing set up. That's quite easy. Right now, the bit that a lot of people stop, and to your question, Ertan, is getting it all the way to the end users, right? Because of, again, stuff like, and there's a lot of valid reasons why that wouldn't happen. You hear like operators that say stuff like, we have billing softwares or IPTV softwares, for example, that do not support v6. So if we deploy it end to end, then these things will break. The answer to that would be, well, then in your purchasing cycles, as you upgrade these things or you talk to your vendors, you can actually make sure that these get upgraded. The bit about the CPEs and the end, as is called, like the last mile problem. Like I said, a lot of the Turk telecoms of the world use that as an excuse, saying, well, we can go all the way to the end users. However, as you saw from the graphs, and I'm going to show them again, a lot of others have figured that out through purchasing cycles, through advocating for v6, for actually giving out devices that do support v6. And if you phase that over the years, it becomes much easier for you to deploy and do. So there are some excuses to not doing v6 end to end. And again, when I say v6, it doesn't have to be v6 only. So v4 and v6 are not backward compatible, as in a v4 address cannot talk to a v6 address because the addresses look very different. There are ways of actually having both of them running at the same time. One of them is something called dual stack, where basically you have a v4 and v6 address on each side, and they get to discuss, they get to negotiate and figure out which protocol they want to be using. There's stuff like happy eyeballs, where basically the request is sent out in both v4 and v6, and the one that replies back faster is the one that they initiate the connection with. This requires running a full v4 and a full v6 network on the same wire, which is not really that difficult. But yeah, it requires you to, if you're doing troubleshooting, or if you're doing maintenance, or if you're doing any kind of monitoring, you need to set it up for both. There are other ways of doing this, which is translation, similar to NAT that does NAT 444 that does v4 to v4, and you're very familiar with that. You can also change from v4 to v6 and back, and that is highly deployed in today's world, where you have these islands of v6, you have these islands of v4, and you have these dual stack folk, v4 and v6. For them to be able to talk to each other, then you need to have some kind of translation. Again, if you were speaking in your native tongue and I was speaking in my native tongue, we would need somebody in the middle that can actually translate back and forth to us, which is what that NAT device does. Translates v4 to v6 to the v4 only, and translate v4 to v6 for the v6 only ones. So yeah, but like I was showing, and yeah, perfect, thank you, Ertan. And like I was showing now, and I'll show again, many have overcome this, and a big part of that jump, if you see India, how dark it is with v6 deployment, or the US, or some countries in Europe, it's mostly and primarily because of the mobile devices. A lot of them have done stuff on the fixed lines as well, and there are very well documented cases of this. Yeah, and they date back to 2011, 2012 as well. Full service providers that just turned on v6. I remember there was this French service provider back in 2011 that just turned on v6 overnight because they were using some kind of open source router. So open source had already supported v6, so it was an easy configuration for them to do overnight. And all of a sudden, France was the country that had the most v6 deployment in the world, just because of one operator over there. But yeah, moving from there, names. So while every device and every that you want to reach, the destinations that you want to reach, have IP addresses that you need to know for you to be able to communicate with them, I highly doubt anybody on this call actually knows what the IP address of Google is, or what the IP address of Facebook is, or Cloudflare, or Akamai, or any of those. And it's not because we don't talk to them. We usually talk to them all the time. It's just that, again, as human beings, we tend to remember names better than we remember numbers. If my designation was, 7 of 9, you wouldn't necessarily remember that, and it would be a bit too complicated for you to do so. However, if my designation is Hisham, then chances are you may remember the name a little bit more than my number, especially if the number is 128 bits long, or 32 for that matter. So we tend to remember names better. Google, Facebook, Akamai, no matter how weird the name is, Alibaba, we tend to remember them, and it's quite easy for us to do so. And if we're looking at the anatomy of a domain, so if we pick on the Ripe-NCC, for example, this is our domain, you would see something like you have the first or top level domain that starts from the right. Now, this is different from the IP addresses that they start from. The most significant becomes the part on the left, right? And then you go back to you have more specificity into the host all the way to you go to your right. In domains, it works the other way around. So it works from the top level on your right. So it's the .NET guys. And these could be either GTLDs, generic top-level domains. So the .coms and the .nets, but also I'm sure you've already heard about stuff like .shop or .green or .shoes. The organization that's responsible for organizing this stuff is called ICANN. And it does this, and it launched a couple of years back the applications for new GTLDs, and this is why you're finding all of these new domains or top levels being used in today's world. There's also something else that is called the CCTLDs, which is the country code top level domain. Your domain, I noticed for your university, is a .tr, which is unique to Turkey. .za would be South Africa, .br would be Brazil, and so on and so forth. And it acts as a country top-level domain identifier. Second level, in this case, would be Ripe. And then after that, it would be the host. What kind of service am I trying to use? And also, what kind of protocol am I using? Am I going to www? Am I going to webmail? Am I going to an FTE service? And you can easily tell this by looking at the domain and figuring out what you're trying to get out of that. Now, what you don't do is, after you write the address, you don't put a dot at the end. Actually, browser is the one that does that for you. And that dot represents routes. And talking very quickly about DNS here. So let's say I am at your university and nobody has ever tried to reach the Ripe-NCC website before. So my device goes to your local DNS server that you have installed at your university. And it says, I am trying to look up the name that is www.ripe.net, because I don't know what the IP address of it is, and I would like you to do that for me. As a human being, I don't remember IP addresses. So it goes to that device that is, its main purpose in life is to take names to numbers and numbers to names, and it asks us that question. Now, when it does so, because it's never heard about www.ripe.net, it needs to ask somebody else, right? It says, I don't really know what that is, let me check for you. And what it does is it goes to the nearest root name server because of the dot that was at the end, like I said, that the browser automatically adds. So there are a number of root name servers, and we'll get to them in the next slide, deployed all over the world, that it goes to and says, I'm looking for www.ripe.net. Can you help me get the IP address? The root server says, well, I don't really know all that, but I do know where .net is. And it gives us the IP address of .net. So then you end up talking to .net and saying, I'm trying to look up www.ripe.net. It says, well, I am .net, and I do know where Ripe is. I don't know what www is, but I do know where Ripe is. So it gives you the IP address of Ripe.net. Then you go to Ripe.net and you ask it for the www service of it, your website. And it says, yes, here's the IP address of the website. So now your DNS server actually has communicated with multiple devices, but it's now figured out the IP address. And it sends it back to your device, saying, you wanted to go to www.ripe.net, here is the IP address that you should be using for that. And then your terminal then establishes what is, in this case, an HTTPS request to the web server that you have the IP address of. And then the web server starts initiating the session and sending you the content back. All this happens as fast as you all know how the internet works. Now, this represents the root servers. So there are 13 root name servers operated by 12 independent organizations. And you can see this is an aggregated map. If you zoom in, you'll see a little bit more of the distribution of them. They are deployed all over the world by, like I said, 12 independent organizations, Ripe-NCC being one of them. So when I mentioned at the beginning, we do a few things for the internet. One of them is we manage a root name server, which is kroots. And that is where the queries go to for asking for the root level queries. Now, interesting fact here about how the internet works, and it's going to come in play in some of the routing discussions that we're going to be having. If the distance that it needs to travel to be able to ask these questions is further, the response time becomes longer. So if you only could ask a server in the, let's say, the US, then the time that it takes for your package to leave from you all the way to the US and back is the delay time that you're dealing with. Now, the closer it is, let's say that it's not in the US anymore, that it's in Europe, so that's kind of half the distance. If it's in Turkey, then it's a very short hop for you to actually go back and ask and come back. So there's something to be said about where these services are deployed, and this is why they are distributed in this fashion. They work with Anycast. For those of you that know what Anycast is, where basically they would have the same, they would share the same IP address, and the first one to reply back would be the one that they would get the information from. So they say, does anybody know where Ripe is, for example? And then the first one to reply back would be the one that actually gives that the answer. And yeah, that's in a nutshell names. Questions, thoughts, more queries? Rotten tomatoes, anything? Okay, so yeah, so I'll give a little bit of an intro, hoping that people can put in some questions while I talk before I go to the slides, and hopefully this triggers something. So the thing is, whether we're talking about routing, or whether we're talking about DNS or others, the idea was the internet, when it was first founded, and I'm sure you've all heard these talks before, was about connecting universities together. So it was a handful of academic people that kind of all knew each other that wanted to get online on this cool new experiment called the internet. And then it started growing and growing, and it had people not just in the US trying to get on board with it, but also in other parts of the world. The Ripe community and the universities in Europe were some of the first to actually go and deploy and be part of this new experiment. And as it started growing and growing, and more people started to do this, the level of knowing who you're talking to started going down. Today, like I said, in Turkey alone, there's more than 500 ASNs. That's 500 autonomous system networks. I highly doubt they all know who they are. And this is just talking into one country, right? If you start thinking into the 60,000 60,000 ASNs worldwide, you really wouldn't know. And this has opened up the opportunity, because more and more of our lives are going online. And again, Gergana and Shafiq are going to be talking more about this. It's opened up the opportunity for people to go, let me try to see what I can do here. Can I get your information? Can I trick you into believing that I'm somebody that I'm not? So if you are trying to reach your your bank website, can I convince you that I am actually your bank, and you can give me your passwords? Or can I attack you doing cyber attacks? And Turkey was subjected to a few of them. You guys would remember the DDoS attacks that were on Turkey a few years back, where, basically that you couldn't reach anything online because of all the garbage DDoS packets that were plugging all the pipes. And that's the thing. As people started not knowing each other, and these actors started coming online, there was a need now to actually start doing things a bit differently. The internet was based on trusts, because, like I said, it was a bunch of academics that all knew each other, and they had no real vested interest into either hacking each other or trying to get each other's information. In today's world, there's a lot of money to be made out of frauding people online, or attacking them, or cyber attacks, or even militarizing the internet for different purposes, which is why at the beginning, the internet, whether it's routing or DNS or other stuff, was based on trust, like I keep on saying. And basically the idea is, if I claim to be the university, the Middle East University in Ankara, nobody had any reason to assume that I wasn't. Now, that is absolutely not the case, because I am not. But if I wanted to, in the DNS system, I just put in an entry that says, here's the IP address, here's my website, come to me if you want to go to that university. And it would trust me. Same thing about BGP and routing. I can easily say, I don't know what your block of IP addresses is, but I can advertise your block of IP addresses to my network and hijack your traffic. That is something that is technically easy, and you see that in a lot of movies and other systems like that. Now, that doesn't really work in today's world, because well, basically hijacking traffic and websites and stuff like that is a, well, depending on the country, but it could be a criminal offense, but also is basically fraud. So there needed to be ways to actually address the trusting nature of the internet that it was founded and built upon, and try to change that into something that had a little bit of a more harder core. And that's why for DNS, they invented something called DNSSEC, where basically there are certificates that certify and say, I am actually the rightful owner of this domain, and I am the only one that can do so. So, and it gets signed for the whole chain. So .tr needs to be signed, .edu needs to be signed, and the university needs to be signed. And if any one of them is vulnerable or not signed, then the whole chain is worthless at that point. But then it allows people to actually validate and make sure, if I'm going to your website, then it is the right website and it's not somebody claiming to be so. And again, maybe it works in a university maybe the example works in a university context or not, but it definitely in a bank scenario, you don't want to be giving your banking credentials to somebody that's claiming to be your bank and has like a very nice phished website that looks like your bank's website, but it really isn't. And this is the kind of stuff that, you know, is used for attacks. Same thing with routing. An example of this, a big example of this, is Pakistan Telecom. A few years back, Pakistan Telecom wanted to prevent citizens in the country from reaching YouTube for whatever political reasons that they had at the time, or religious reasons or whatever. So they devised a technical solution for this, where they were advertising a more specific route for YouTube. So basically, the way that routing tables work very quickly is, if I am asking, for example, I want to know where the METU university is, right? And somebody says, yeah, I know it's in Turkey somewhere. And somebody else says, I know it's in Ankara somewhere. And somebody else gives me the address of the street. Then I would listen to the guy that gives me the address of the street, because the others are way too big and generic. So the more specific, the more I would go with that answer. So basically what Pakistan Telecom did is it gave a more specific address to, if you want to go to YouTube, go over here. And they kind of black holed that. So anybody in Pakistan that was trying to reach YouTube would go to the more specific address and find themselves being black holed. The problem with that is that those routes leaked out of the country. So it wasn't just Pakistan that was affected by this. It was beginning to affect neighboring countries, that all of them were seeing a more specific address to YouTube than the one that YouTube, the rightful holder of the resources, is advertising. So they would go to that one, and they would all be black holed. So basically, after a few hours, maybe days, YouTube actually fully recovered from this by advertising even more specific routes. So like I said, instead of saying Ankara, giving the street name. And they managed to fix this. But it was a problem that only existed because the trusting nature of the internet allowed somebody that did not have any affiliation with YouTube to advertise the YouTube resources, the IP addresses, and claim that they are YouTube. And this is where something like RPKI and trust comes in play. I'm going to show my slides now, but questions, comments, thoughts, experiences, something that you would like me to highlight a little bit more? Yes, perfect. Since you mentioned volumetric DDoS attacks, are there any good solutions for that? There are multiple solutions for this. It's not necessarily something that is covered in these slides, but there's the way that you deal with DDoS, and I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with DDoS. Basically, it is an attempt to overwhelm your network by sending large tsunami waves of packets towards you. That's at least the volumetric type. That just plug your pipes, right? You cannot really get anything in and out because of all the garbage that is soaring towards you. Now, the fix to this is that you go one level up, right? Instead of the traffic hitting your network and completely putting you at siege within your network, again, similar to what happened in Turkey a few years back, that you go to the upstreams and have them prevent that traffic from actually hitting you, right? So you go a level up. And there are a lot of solutions, whether from vendor perspectives or technical, that do stuff like black holing. There's communities, ASN communities that allow you to actually push large amounts of that traffic at multiple levels before they even reach you. Because if it reaches your network, then there's not much that you can end up doing. The only thing that you can do is, like I said, go a level above you and try to just basically drain all that garbage somewhere else so that it doesn't hit you and you can still get your traffic up and running. There are a few vendors that do this. Like I said, there are now best practices in terms of how can you make sure that you have different ASNs that black hole this, that sync the traffic, that push it somewhere else, that scrub this. So there's multiple ways of actually dealing with this, but you cannot deal with this at a network level. It always needs to be done one level up. Did that answer the question, Ertan? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. But it is an example of using that. And it's not just the volumetric attacks as well. There's other types where basically it kind of takes advantage of the fact that it starts a session, but it doesn't finish transmitting everything. So your device keeps on waiting and waiting and waiting for the packets and the transmission to end, and it doesn't, and it utilizes time. And if you do that multiple times, then you can also kind of put your whole network at a kind of a hanging state where it's just waiting on things that will never happen. So there are different ways of doing this. And again, they're all taking advantage of vulnerabilities of the way that the technology was built based on trust, which brings us back to the slide deck that I'm pulling up now. And we get to talk about trusts on the internet, right? So when to trust? Like I was saying, DNS is sent over plain text, as in if I am putting some kind of device or software that can read your UDP traffic, I can actually know which websites you visit. Right? And there are people that actually do this for a living, and it's a business where they want to target you with either malicious or non-malicious stuff. A big part of marketing is now being done this way, where they can go, "Ooh, you're interested in, I don't know, shoes and travel and bags and stuff. Okay, here's a new shops that open up that do this stuff," and they get that from your behavior of doing this. Now, you never really authorize them to look up your DNS traffic. And because it's being sent in plain text, it's very easy for you to do. Now, the example I gave was somebody that is interested in travel and shoes, but it could be more than that. It could be used to figure out your political perspectives. It could be used to know which football team that you like. It could be used to know what kind of family medical history you're looking up. And that is stuff that is given without your permission. right? You just type in an address and you assume that it's, you get the answer, not knowing that somebody's actually mining your information and figuring that stuff out. It also is vulnerable for attacks, hijacks, mistakes, and all the other stuff. The example that I was talking about is if I can actually convince your university DNS server that I am the National Bank of Turkey, for example, I'm assuming that's a bank, and all the students that are trying to log in to pay their tuition fees or transfer money go to my website instead of the official website because I've tricked the DNS into figuring out, because when you type in National Bank of Turkey and you hit enter and you get a website, you don't really question, is this the real website or not? You don't go, is this really Google? Does the G look the same color as it usually does, or is it lighter? You don't, right? You kind of trust that. Now, compromising your DNS is not necessarily that difficult. There's ways of doing so, which means that it needs to be better fortified and the trust level goes down, and making sure that this stuff cannot happen goes up. Now, some examples of this, there was in April 2018, time flies, especially with COVID. This is 3 years ago, where there was this big e-money hijack that actually had a combination of both BGP and DNS hijacking it. The URL is in the slides if you want to read it. It's an interesting case to read. And it went unnoticed for 2 hours. And during these 2 hours, the bad guys, or the smart guys, or whatever you want to call them in this case, ended up taking a lot of money out of during this time. It was a 2-hour window of vulnerability just because of these systems that allow people to just trust. So, yeah, looking at routing incidents 2019, you can see the amount of different incidents that happen, and they could be for different reasons. There's a common thing called fat fingering, where basically you just type in the wrong address or ASN or something like when you're configuring, and then you deploy online, and all of a sudden you've taken down somebody else's network because you put a 2 instead of a 3 somewhere. That happens. There are cases that are more malicious and targeted. Like I said, the Pakistan Telecom one would be an example of this. But as you can see, there are significant enough numbers and people being affected by this that it makes it into a general concern of what needs to happen. Now, yeah, I was talking about fat fingers, and yeah, there's also leaks that happened. The Pakistan Telecom thing was a leak, right? They could, in their network, configure things the way that they want. You can argue, if they have the right to do so or not. That's a whole other internet governance discussion. But the fact that it leaked out of Pakistan was a leak. They didn't mean that to happen. And these kind of things happen. Sometimes you end up with, I went to a hotel in Turkey, actually, that used for their internal subnetting 11 dot blah, 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 blah. Now, 11 dot is reserved for the US Department of Defense, DOD. So it was very interesting when I saw those IP addresses, because I would know that if you get an 11 dot blah, blah, blah IP, then it actually is reserved for them, and you don't necessarily see them being routed online. Now, if the hotel made the mistake of leaking that advertisement, so as long as it's using it in their internal campus, that's fine. But if it gets leaked, then all of a sudden anybody that's trying to reach the Department of Defense in the US ends up going to that Turkish hotel. I don't even remember where it was. It was a few years back. I can look it up. And then it's considered to be a hijack of the DOD in the US. And it would have been a very easy thing to do. So to address this, there are a few technologies that were put in place. Hashes, and again, being with technical backgrounds, I assume you know what that is. But basically, if you put in a text through a hash function and it comes out with something, if you put it back through that function, it does not give you back the same text, but it will give you something of a fixed length. Encryption, Bob and Alice, for those of you that do encryption, you have the private key, you have the public key, and basically you use them to sign and encrypt so that people cannot look up the messaging. And again, this comes in play, like I said, with the DNS bit, because it was being sent in plain text. So now your DNS traffic can be encrypted through something like DNSSEC, and you would use your public key to encrypt, to decrypt the messages that are coded. So if you use them in combination together, so basically, yeah, if you use that, you end up with encrypted text. If you combine them together, you end up with something called a digital signature. And that signature is a certificate that uniquely identifies you. And we were talking about, so if you are a unique holder of unique addresses, and they need to be unique, right? If your ASN needs to be unique, your IPv4 addresses, your v6 addresses, and you should be the only holder of these resources. Same thing with your domain names. You would be issued a certificate that, or a signature that actually allows you to say, I am the rightful holder of these resources, and anybody else that claims that they are frauds. So if I try to spoof your university resources, IPs, or domain, then I wouldn't be able to do so for people that actually check and validate. And that's also an interesting point. How many people do check and validate? Now, the more people do so, the more bulletproof the system becomes, because then everybody's checking. At this point in time, not everybody's checking, but those are really going up, and especially when it comes to routing today. This kind of describes also what happens at the multiple levels. Like I said, if you are doing something like signing your domain, then also .tr needs to be signed, .edu needs to be signed, plus your METU needs to be signed as well. And they all need to have their own certificates. There's a whole process for certificate rollover, and all the way up to the GTLDs, the top level domains. When we start talking about routing on the internet, again, basically the idea is still that is based on trust. So BGP protocol, you say, I have these subnets, the other one says, I have those subnets, and they get to exchange, they put them in the routing tables, and if any traffic is meant to any of these destinations, it pushes it towards them, right? Now, the question of trust here that I kind of played out while I was describing this comes in play here now. Are you really the one that you claim that you are, or are you just trying to trick me into me sending my traffic towards you? And this is where something like the certificate, so yes, so you have something like an internet routing registry, which again, Ripe-NCC runs one of those, because we do have which IP addresses we gave to which operator. So then they can go and validate through that. They can look it up and go, okay, you actually are the one that you're claiming you are. And yes, the other one looks it up. So using an IRR, internet routing registry, you can actually check and see if you are who you really claim you're being or not. Now, there are a few out there, Ripe database being one of them, the RADB being one of them, and basically it does a verification of the holdership of the resources. Do you have the right to actually use these resources or not? For those of you that do play around with the routing, you may have heard the term bogons before, which is basically people that are advertising resources that haven't been allocated. So if the NCC still has some resources it hasn't given to it, if the NCC has given resources to somebody and you use those resources, you're hijacking them. However, if you're using resources that have not been yet assigned to anybody, that's called a bogon, your advertising space that has not been yet allocated, and that is also something that should not happen, and you should not be seeing that online. And you have these mechanisms where they check up on the databases to check what's been allocated and what hasn't been allocated and make sure that they are filtered against. Now, Now, again, all of these things that I'm talking about, none of them are silver bullets here, but in combination, filtering with the IRR, with the RPKI, with the DNSSEC, they are hardening the core of the internet, allowing less and less of these attacks to be able to happen. And if you start looking into something like RPKI, so what RPKI does is it ties the IP addresses to the ASNs. Right? So you say this ASN has these IP addresses behind them and the authorized resource holder is blah. And it gets a signature based on, like I said, a certificate, and you end up with a chain of trust where you create these certificates and they get validated when you want to then start communicating. So two devices that want to communicate together, they go through the RPKI repository and they validate if that route is actually true or not. If it is, then it accepts it and it puts it in its routing table. If it doesn't, then it either, depending on what it does, it should drop it. Like I said, today, the ones that drop it are not that high just because the uptake of RPKI, while it is high, not everybody is doing RPKI yet. So there are people that are saying, we're afraid if we drop the unvalidated or the invalid or the even out-of-date certificates, then we end up losing all the traffic. Now, that is being very highly pushed in the right direction by some of the content providers. So you see now the Googles, the Facebooks, the others of the world, when they say to, again, picking on Super Online, for example, Subturk Telecom here, they go to them and say, if you want to advertise your resources to us, if you want to have a BGP session with us, it needs to be signed via RPKI. And this is why we're seeing large uptakes in RPKI worldwide, because of content really pushing for this. Again, Google being and YouTube being a prime example of somebody that was actually very negatively affected in the Pakistan Telecom case of this, but also all the others that are trying to serve the content, they want to make sure that they're serving it to the right place. So we do expect to see more and more people dropping invalid routes as RPKI takes off moving forward. And I will pause again here to first of all check the time, but also to see if you have questions on this. So any questions? Thoughts? You know, Gergana organizes a lot of these sessions in Turkey. We've done a few at universities in Istanbul, and I usually find the students very quiet there as well. I don't know if that's a cultural thing or something.
Maybe it can be a cultural thing. Let me ask you a question.
Go ahead.
What is the rate of this authentication of the route advertisements? I mean, if you have RPKI, then what is the use of having BGP? You can control everything from a centralized server. Everybody can publish their routes to the centralized server, and everybody can pull the BGP routes from the server. So what is the idea of, what is the rate of authentication of this BGP announcements in that case?
The rate of authentication, as in how much time does it take
for each BGP advertisement? Do you do this authentication or?
Well, I mean, you do that when you validate to put the entry into your routing table. You don't need to do that every time that you're sending out a packet or you're doing a session there. But if somebody is advertising a route to you that you want to add to your routing table, then you need to check and validate that. The time that it actually takes to do this is negligible, really. You can do like the whole routing table in I guess couple minutes, maybe less. I've seen that done. There are a few validators out there. The Ripe-NCC used to run a validator. However, we have sunset that. I think it's sunset by this point in time. But there are others that do this. There's something called Routinator run by NL Labs. There's, I think NTT runs one. There's one run by Cloudflare. There are a few of them that are deployed out there that can help with the validation and make sure that it's there. There is a question here about, there are a couple of questions coming in. Do you have it for Ripe and for the world? Actually, so one of the interesting things, and there's an article, maybe Gergana can help me by posting it on chat here. I think we published it as an article. One of the things that we recently did was we have our own ASN AS3333 at the Ripe-NCC that we did. We started dropping invalids for people that did not have RPKI signed. It was a very, and this is one of the nice things when it comes to deploying technologies. When it's an uneventful event, it's usually a good thing, as in it comes and goes and nobody really notices it, even though you have a lot of build-up and tension coming up to it. So it was one of these things that people were concerned about breaking parts of the internet if it actually happens. We did it, it works, it's still working, and like I said, I think we have a blog published about this. It talks about how we're using this, but you can easily see lots of countries that have major deployments of RPKI, and the number is just going up in terms of getting certified and getting that done. I hope that answered the question, and if it didn't, just put another thing. Thank you, Gergana, for the article. Another question here is, IP flooding attacks still become an issue when you use IP version 6.2 almost? So again, v4, v6, very similar in their function, and they pretty much do the same thing, right? They're just source and destination addresses. You can still, to give an example of real life, like I can still block a street, whether you call it V4 street or V6 street, by putting a big car that prevents people from coming in, right? So the techniques would be similar, whether you use V4 or V6. Now, some of the concerns about using V6 aren't necessarily from the idea of it being blocked per se, but it's more about in IoT devices, for example. IoT devices usually have like a battery, and they're usually like stored in a world somewhere that it doesn't have a lot of computing power. So there were concerns about IPv6 addresses being too big for IoT devices, even though they were created with IoT in mind, but just the practicality and the physical limitations that these devices have. Now, one of the things that they ended up doing at the IETF level, which is a body that does standardization when it comes to internet-related matters, is they came up with a lighter version of IP version 6. So there's something called 6LoWPAN. I can type that in chat here, which basically talks about, I think it's this. Yeah, which basically talks about using IP version 6 addresses for devices that, for IoT devices that do not have a strong memory or batteries to do so. So if you are interested in IoT a bit and you want to play around with V6, then yeah, look up what I put in chat here, and it's interesting work that's being done there. Other than that, V4, V6 are very similar, and the way that you need to protect your network on V4 and V6 are similar as well. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Okay, cool. Gergana, how am I on time?
10 more minutes.
Okay, 10 more minutes, perfectly. I can show you a few things that I hope would be interesting. So if we look here, because I know you guys wanted to talk a little bit about routing and stuff. So here's an interesting thing that the Ripe-NCC does, is we run a large measurement network called Ripe-Atlas. And again, if somebody can help me from the NCC guys in putting in chat the URL to it. It's basically a large network of probes that are distributed all over the world. I think we have over 11,000 probes. This is a nice confetti map that shows we have probes deployed all over the world that you can then run measurements for. Now, we have a credit system that you need to have certain credits to schedule measurements, and we use that so that people cannot use this for, like, using them for DDoS attacks or stuff like that, but also to incentivize people to actually keep them deployed. But if you're an academic and you're trying to do research on RPKI, if you're trying to do research on the internet, we are more than happy to provide you with credits to run your research if you get in contact with Gergana or anybody from the R&D teams, they would hook you up and give you the credits that you can actually use. And this is a version of the probes. We are now looking into deploying the fifth version of this. I don't know exactly how it would look like, but a large number of them are there. We do now have soft probes now. So soft probes, if you're using stuff like CentOS, if you're using stuff like Docker or anything like that, you can just download the probe and just get it up and running on your network. Pretty much you don't even need to have a physical component like this. But for those of you that like the plug and play, we do have probes like this that you can just plug into your network. Basically, what it needs is a USB port for power and a Ethernet port for connecting to the internet, and then you can run your measurements. I talked about the credit system. Basically, what it does in terms of measurements is the following. It can do stuff like ping, traceroute, DNS, HTTP, NTP, and other stuff like that. It gives you a nice understanding of how the internet works, and not just from your side. So basically, how it would work is it shows you the asymmetric nature of the internet. If you in Turkey have an IP address, let's say in the UK, and you're pinging and trace routing to it, it's very easy for you to figure that from your side to them. Now, what these measurements allow you to do is to test from their side to you to see how the rest of the world sees you. So if your domain name, for example, is being visible from China or not, and what is the delay in terms of people reaching your content there, that is something that you can measure using the probes that are hosted in China. So it shows you that asymmetric nature. And you don't need to have an actual person in China doing that for you or know a source and destination address, because the probe system will figure that out for you. This is a picture of an anchor, which is something a little bit bigger than a probe. It has a little bit more power and oomph to it. As you can see, it's a 1U rack-mounted server. I have one in my office here in Dubai. There are few deployed all over the world at exchange points and data centers. It does require a rack, as you can see. So the probes themselves would be put at home residential networks, but these require like a data center, a little bit more stable, and yeah, the expected running time for them to be up is always pretty much. Skipping through this, there's security disclosures, and we run vulnerability tests on these for those of you that are interested in the security aspect of this. But I want to show some of the use cases here. So basically, you can see some of the tests, and we have articles about these. Every one of these titles is an article on Ripe Labs. If you go to Ripe Labs and you just put Ripe Atlas, you're going to find multiple documents and talks about how it could actually be done to measure and monitor gaming services, for example, or measure cloud performances, or debug network connectivity. Or there's one, there it is, internet access assumption in Turkey back in 2016. You guys would remember that probably. And we run different measurements to see IoT in Africa. I don't know why that's put there twice, but it is. So you can see all these different things: route time, RTTs, how traffic is managed and optimized. And a colleague of ours actually built this tool on top of it. You can build multiple tools or use some of the tools that are already there that do like a full mesh. So he took an example of, I think this was Sweden, if I'm not mistaken, my geography. And he was, Sweden. And he started doing a full mesh, trying to measure from every probe to every probe. Does the traffic stay within the country? Does it leave the country? And over V4 and V6. And as you can see, the ones with the dotted lines showed that traffic didn't necessarily stay in Sweden. It went to other countries, neighboring countries, and there were explanations for this. And the map that has the green and the red and the yellow, that they've now changed the colors because people were complaining about being colorblind, but it showed visually how much of the traffic stayed within the country, how much of the traffic, which would be the green and the yellow stuff, how much of it left the country, which is the blue and the red stuff. And then people can optimize their routing and figuring out, oh, wow, okay, I thought I was going directly from Super Online to Turk Telecom. I had no idea that my traffic is actually going via Marseille because they're not peering locally, as an example. I pick on them because I like them. They didn't want to peer together for a very long time because of competition, but yeah, things are changing now in Turkey. And yeah, so you can see stuff like the DDoS attack that was done on Dyn. For those of you that are interested in DDoS, I do see a lot of questions about that. There are certain botnets that they end up testing and seeing the effect of them. I was just listening to a talk from Team Kimru, if you guys know who they are, people that do a lot of security stuff, that were talking about the new, what was it called? Big Hola or something, Deep Hola, something like that, Microsoft thing. And yeah, a lot of measurements can be done to trace and figure this stuff out, monitoring the gaming applications. We actually had talks with the guys from Ubisoft, for the gamers in the room. And they also wanted to use this platform to measure like stuff like latency and performance, because you know, if you are a gamer, like for a long time when you would talk to operators, and this was like some of the excuses that we'd hear from the bigger operators that didn't want to peer locally, like the two that I'm picking on here. They would say, yeah, but it's a small trombone thing. It's a small traffic detour that it leaves the traffic leaves the country, goes to Europe and comes back. It's still a few milliseconds. People don't really feel that when they're doing mail or YouTubing and stuff like that. And again, the YouTubes of the world fix that by even caching locally. But when it comes to stuff like gaming, you know that if you hit shoot on a first shooter game kind of a thing, or whatever else game that you're playing, if there's a delay on your network, you end up losing because the command that you gave didn't take effect fast enough. So gaming is really a game changer when it comes to peering into connection, because any kind of delay is really sensitive in this application. And with more and more gamers out there and a whole generation that lives on their iPhones now, they need to get their act together, the operators, I mean. It was used in Amsterdam when they had power cuts. Amsterdam, for those of you that, or the Netherlands, for those of you that know the Netherlands, it's a very flat country that has a lot of windmills and they have a lot of electricity. So power going down was a weird thing for them. They had that back in 2015. And the cool thing that this allowed to show was, as the electricity went down, the internet went down in these places, and as electricity came back on, the routers booted and the probes went online as well. And it gave a very interesting map to show how, you know, electricity went down and up all over the country. It was a really interesting thing to say. This is Turkey. Like I said, the new maps have different colors. Basically, you do see that the picture is a little bit better now. Traffic does stay local. Not all of it goes to the exchanges, but the nice thing is now I think I hear that there are 3 exchanges in Turkey, at least. I know of 2 of them for a fact. And yeah, traffic stays within the country, doesn't leave that much except for the one that has the yellowish color over there. I think I've taken over. Yeah, well, perfect. Questions, and I'm on time. So if anybody has any questions, let me know. And if not, I hand back to Gergana, and thank you for your time.
Let's wait a little bit.
Yeah.
Somebody has a question.
Or somebody can say it was an awesome talk and they liked it. That's all.
Thank you very much. It was a great talk.
Thank you, Erdem. Thank you. Yeah, much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Can you show IXP at Turkey again? Okay, so this was, and again, this is, granted, this is a little bit of an old, I can actually put the newer map here in chat. This was an older one. So basically what this suggests here is we have probes in all of these ASNs, and I know you cannot read them, but this is why I'm going to put the URL in there. We have probes in all of these ASNs, and it does a full mesh to see if the traffic stays within the country or not. Now, the darker green ones are the ones that go via the exchange. and the others, we don't know that they're going through the exchange. They could be direct peering, for example, and which is perfectly fine as long as the traffic stays within the country. But I'll put in the link there. Awesome talk. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Okay, cool. I'll put the slide, the link in, and Gergana, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Hisham. So a question for you all: do you want us to make a short pause, a toilet break, or do you want me to jump straight to the other presentations?
Would you mind if you give a 5-minute break then?
Okay.
We'll
Okay.
just start at 11:05 then.
Yeah,
right?
let's break for 5 minutes, and I'll see you soon.
Cool. And I just put the link in there for those that want to look at it. Cheers.
So I'm ready to start, if you all are. Okay, let me share my screen. So hi again, everyone. My name is Gergana Petrova. I'm going to split my time in 3 parts today. In the first 20 or so minutes, I'm going to talk about the Ripe community and also the Ripe-NCC. So those are 2 different things. I'm going to explain to you what each of them is. In the second part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about something completely different. I'm going to show you 2 academic studies that analyzed what happened in 2020, in the beginning of 2020, when a lot of countries decided to impose lockdowns due to the pandemic. And so we're going to see what the studies show, what happened to internet traffic then. And then in the last part of my talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about internet governance. So that's the political part of the internet, when we basically discuss what happens on the internet, so not of the infrastructure layer. And it's basically about how we want it to be used, how we want it to be developed. It also concerns different rules, policies, and regulations that we discuss in the internet sphere. So talking about, starting with the first bit, the Ripe community and Ripe-NCC. First of all, what is the Ripe community? The Ripe, the abbreviation is in French. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. It's the first bullet point on the slide. It roughly translates as the European IP resources. You will see later in the slide that they're actually not just the European ones. Our territory is a little bit larger than that. But back in 1989, when this community was created, it was basically a way to gather a group of people interested in talking about how the internet and the technical side of the internet is managed. It's important to note that this community is open. That means that anybody can join. There is no fee to attend. Anybody is free to take part in the discussions. Doesn't matter what sort of education level you have, what your major is, who your employer is. So long as you have an interest in how the internet is coordinated, then you can join the discussion. It is bottom up. What does that mean? Decisions are always discussed by the group. There is no voting. It is not like the majority can impose a certain decision. Policies are usually discussed thoroughly, and all objections or reservations are paid attention to. The community tries to reach a consensus or a rough consensus before accepting any policy. This means that even if there is one but very valid objection, consensus cannot be reached until either a decision or a solution is found, or until the community agrees that the objection is not significant enough to hold up progress. This also refers a little bit back to the third part of my presentation, internet governance. This is very important because it is different than how governments, for example, operate, because they vote, right? And the majority kind of can get the law passed. It is very different than how the Ripe community operates, where it's really a discussion of the entire group. It is transparent. What does that mean? So we have mailing lists, the archives of which are public to anybody. So you don't even need to be subscribed to the mailing list. You can just go on our website, click on the mailing list that you're interested in, and you can see the discussion, how it developed. This is really important because this allows, for example, new joiners to take a look at the history and have a better idea of, oh, this is how this happened. So what the community does, as I already mentioned, it's responsible for making policies on a range of issues. And they also share information, best practices. The work is structured in working groups. We have quite a lot of working groups. We have a working group on address policy, a working group on DNS. We have a working group on measurement and analysis, open source, IoT, cooperation with other parties, anti-abuse. So what I would advise you is, if you're interested in a certain topic, just pick that working group, the mailing list of that working group, and see if the discussions that are going on there are of interest. Majority of the discussion happens on the mailing list, and decisions are always announced on the mailing list. However, we also have Ripe meetings. You can see the picture on the slide is from a Ripe meeting. Those are events where the community can meet in person. Well, in person pre-pandemic times. And again, the same is valid as for the Ripe community. Anybody can attend this meeting. It doesn't matter who you work for or who you represent. You can also come as a private person. Yeah, there are quite interesting presentations on it. What is the Ripe NCC? So the Ripe NCC, I've added the NCC abbreviation. That stands for Network Coordination Center. So together, Ripe NCC, that is the organization that I, Hisham, and Shafiq work for. It was established 3 years after the Ripe community in 1992. So this Ripe NCC is a legal entity, unlike the Ripe community. We are an organization, we are non-profit, and we get our funding from our members. Who our members are, I'm going to talk in the next slide. So we are one of the 5 regional internet registries. I will explain a little bit later exactly what that means. You can see on the slide which is our territory that we cover. So that's Europe, Middle East, and parts of Central Asia. Majority of our staff is based in Amsterdam. We're about 140 people. We have a few people based in Dubai, both Hisham and Shafiq are there. We have a few people in Moscow as well, as a small satellite office. So there are a total of 5 regional internet registries in the world. Each of them have their own territory, and each of them have their own community. The way that Ripe NCC has Ripe to serve, all the other 4 have their own communities that are responsible for the development of the policies on their territory. So there is AREN for North America, there is LACNIC for South America, AFRINIC for Africa, and APNIC for Southeast Asia and Oceania. What does Regional Internet Registry does? So Hisham already talked a lot about this, so I'm not going to spend too much time. But our main job is to allocate number resources. So number resources, that's both the IP version 4 and version 6, as well as autonomous system numbers. What we also do is we maintain a registry so that a part of which is public. So people anywhere that have an IP address and they wonder which organization has it can look that up. So long as they are our members. So this is how the process works. Hisham already mentioned ICANN, who operate IANA, the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. So they manage all the unallocated IP addresses and ASN numbers, AS numbers. So they distribute, they give huge blocks to the 5 RIRs. So that's we being one of them. We further distribute them down to our members. So our members, who are those? Traditionally, those are internet service providers, internet exchange points, universities. As Hisham already mentioned, universities are actually what started the internet. So for a very long time, especially in the 90s, majority or a big chunk of our members were universities and ISPs. Those were basically the large blocks. Also governments. Basically, anybody who wants to run their own network, they can become our member, ask for a block of addresses. In recent years, we have seen that other organizations prefer to run their own network rather than rely on a provider. So we have seen an increase of members such as airports or banks or hospitals. So those are institutions that are, you know, nervous about attacks, and they want to like control everything. They want to have, for example, a high level of security, and so they become straight our members rather than going through somebody. Yeah, so as I mentioned, we maintain a list, a database on who has which block. But in addition to the management of internet number resources, we also do quite a lot of things that support the development and infrastructure of the internet. One of the main things in this bracket is the management of the mailing lists, where the discussions are taking place, the organization of the Ripe meetings. In terms of services that benefit the internet at large, Hisham already spoke previously about Ripe Atlas, our measurement platform. We host the KRoot server and a bunch of other things. So this is how an entry in the Ripe database might look like. On the picture, you can see the sort of information that is publicly available. What I have searched for is your university. So you can, for example, see, first of all, that it is your university that is directly the owner of the resources. You're not going through an external provider, which is what most universities do. So you have it, you can see the name, you can see the block of addresses that you have. You can see contact, abuse contact, which is a requirement. You can see that you have these resources since 2002. You modify the entry 2019. So modifying the entry, that means that, for example, maybe the contact information or whoever in your network department that is managing those resources, you know, sometimes people change in the departments, positions change. So it is important to update the entry so that we have the most recent information and can reach the relevant person as soon as possible. What you cannot find in the Ripe database, you cannot find information about domain names or customer reassignments. So if I go here, the members can also further down the chain distribute their own blocks or parts of their own blocks to their own customers. If you want information about that, then you have to go to that member and ask them to provide you this information. I'm mentioning this because a lot of law enforcement ask us this information. All we can do is tell them, okay, this big block that we have distributed, this is the organization that has it. If you want to know more particulars, then you have to contact that organization in particular, and they're gonna be able to give you more information. And then you also cannot find accurate geographic location of the network or end user. This is another thing that law enforcement is always very curious about. But the Ripe database does not offer this information. Next, I wanted to show you a few learning opportunities and also like just how you can get engaged in the Ripe community. I will share the slides, so don't worry about copying the links. So on the first link, you can see our webinar recordings. So those are usually on a particular topic. There's one on RPKI. We have one on measurements and tools that also looks at Ripe Atlas in more detail. And they usually last 1 hour each, so it's a really nice manageable chunks. We also have Ripe Academy. So this is these are all for free. Yeah. In the Ripe Academy, you can find two courses: the Ripe database and Introduction to V6. so basically this is a course that you can take, and later on we have also developed exams that you can take to basically certify that you have taken the course and you have the needed knowledge. This is actually what I'm talking about. The Ripe-NC Certified Professionals is a program that we recently launched. So the way that this works is similar to other certifications. You can basically ask for an appointment. Usually you have to wait for the appointment is quite quickly, maybe the next day or the day after. You can take the exam and there is a person watching you remotely. At the end of the exam, you can get a certificate. So just for students, we are offering, and we launched this like super recently, about 3 months ago. So temporarily, we're giving free vouchers to students. If you're interested in taking the Ripe Academy course and then taking the exam, please write to exams@ripe.net. They can give you a voucher for the exam certification. But the Ripe Academy course, so this one, you can do for free. You don't need to email anybody. Everything is online. I think you just need to make a register for free, but that's about it. Then the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is the Ripe meeting that is upcoming. Well, the one thing that the current situation is maybe helping with is that the students who have limited budget can actually attend because it's all virtual. I think it's a really good opportunity for you guys if you want to get a little bit more involved and see what the discussion is about to attend this time. So it's in May, in 2 or 3 weeks. This is the program. One of the sessions that I definitely encourage you to attend is the academic session. So it's on Friday at 2 o'clock. The times are Central European time. So I think for you, it's going to be, 3 o'clock. So that is one of the sessions. You can see that there are quite a lot of plenaries. There are also, the plenary is good for newcomers to attend because the topics they cover are a little bit more general. So if you want to get introduced to it, that's a really nice way. At the same time, they are quite technical. So this is definitely a very, very technical meeting. And then you can see that, so these Address Policy Open Source Connect, these are our working groups. If you're interested in one of them, please feel free to join. Registration is free, yeah. MAT stands for Measurement and Analysis and Tools. So this is an interesting session for academics. And yeah, other ones, it really depends on your areas of interest. So yeah, this is the ripe82.ripe.net is the page where you can go on and register. Let's see. Well, actually, so this is what I wanted to share with you about Ripe and Ripe-NCC. Let me see if you have any questions up until this point before I start talking about pandemic studies. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I see that there's a cybersecurity challenge on the program of this Ripe-82. Cybersecurity challenge. Do you have any information about that?
I think I'll have to look that up. I'm not sure if this is, so the program on the Ripe meetings is not organized by Ripe-NCC, it's the Ripe community. So I'm not sure what that one is about. I will have to look that up, and maybe I will write to you in the chat when Shafiq is talking. And I see that there is another question with the online links. I will post them in the chat right now. Okay. Any other questions? I don't see, so I will move to the next presentation. So it's about how the lockdown in different countries affected traffic on the internet. So first of all, a little bit of introduction. I'm probably not going to share any new information with you, but just to set the tone that there are different patterns of human behavior that obviously influence traffic. What I mean by that, most of us sleep at night. So during the day, we see that there is a lot of more use of the internet. Most of us work from 9 to 5. Most of us don't work on the weekend. And so this definitely affects how much traffic we see on the network. A lot of us are outside in summer, but indoors in winter. So this also has influences. But this is nothing new. Network operators are kind of used to this variation of the amount of traffic that they see. So a lot of them have what we call redundancies or reserve capacities in order to be able to handle the variation in network traffic. So basically so that they can handle the peak demand whenever it is. So basically this is what with the lockdown in several countries, the behavior of people changed. Yeah, so now they were spending a lot more time at home and bored, not having much to do, and basically using the internet a lot more intensively than before lockdown. This is what led some academics to basically try to find out what happened and what the effect was. This is the first study that I'm going to talk about. Impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the internet latency. It was done in Italy because it was one of the first countries affected outside of China that went into lockdown. I hope that you can see my mouse. So here you can see kind of how the lockdown progressed over time. So 22nd of February, some municipalities closed, and then 1st of March, even more. 4th of March, school and universities shut down, and 7th of March, a part of Italy, so northern Italy was on lockdown, and 9th of March, all of Italy was on lockdown. What the academics did, if you take a look at the right-hand side, they took 2 weeks. So the first week they looked at was 11th to 18th of February, and that's the baseline week before lockdown. And then they compared it to 10th to 17th of March, which is the first week of lockdown. What they have measured is the latency, so that is how slow, it's measured in milliseconds, how slow the internet was, how long you had to wait, for example, before you get the response, before a page loads. And you can see, even without looking at the results, just by simple observation, that the latencies that people experienced in the baseline week before COVID were much smaller than in the week of March 10th to 17th, where you can see much noticeable and larger spikes. So basically, the internet took longer to deliver. They also analyzed basically when exactly during the day the latency was increased the most. So what you see here, they took the after, so during lockdown, the latency value during lockdown, and then they subtracted the latency value before. So technically, you could also see a negative value if the internet was slower before. But as you can see on the graph, in all of the hours of the day, or almost all of the hours of the day, apart from 4 to 6 a.m., the internet was a lot slower during the pandemic. And you can see that the latency, starts increasing with the beginning of the working day. So that basically leads us to believe that more people were using the internet, even during working hours. And then it peaks in the evening. So when people are at home and they cannot go to bars and restaurants, but they're stuck in front of the computer. So that led them to believe that the most likely explanation for majority of the latency increase was entertainment. People were streaming or gaming. This also kind of gets confirmed when we look at they also looked at the YouTube traffic. So this is the graph that shows YouTube traffic in the very early hours of the morning, 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. And you can see this is their baseline week, and this is the first pandemic week. Even with simple eye observation, you can see that they look kind of similar. So there wasn't that much difference. And when you look at the traffic later in the evening, so 8 to 9, then you can see that this gray area, so the pandemic week, is kind of higher latency than the same value in the pre-pandemic week. So we definitely see like an increase in traffic during the pandemic in the late hours of the day. So this is what the first research was basically looking at. This was, I think, done in April, May last year. And so at that time, a lot of people, and especially politicians, were wondering if the internet infrastructure is going to keep up with the surge of traffic. So, like, are we going to have an outage, or are we still going to be able to continue working? And, like, we now know that it works, but back then it wasn't so straightforward. A lot of people were kind of bracing themselves with, oh, what is going to happen if things break? And so this was I have prepared a few graphs that can give an overview of exactly what happens. I'm continuing with Italy just because it was the previous study. So this was a graph that shows Italy's internet performance as measured in download speeds. You can see that, so this is pre-pandemic times, and then as you reach as the lockdown happens, you can see that the download speeds decrease. However, you can see that this lasted roughly 2 months. So as soon as network operators saw the decrease, they started working on providing more capacity. And then in about 2 months, even though the pandemic continued, the speeds recovered. This we can see both, this recovery we can see both in the fixed and mobile networks. And you can see that afterwards it continues to increase. And so I think what is interesting, first of all, to note that this graph, the drop is not that big. I mean, from 60 to 52, that is not a huge breakdown on performance. So we're really happy that actually everything held up really nicely. On the right-hand side, you can see some countries that had a similar performance, like Italy, France, Greece, Portugal, and also some other countries that had it, but maybe less pronounced of a fall. So they did slightly better. Then there are countries like the Netherlands that didn't see any change at all, neither in fixed nor in mobile. Other countries like that, Belgium, Hungary, Denmark, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Poland, Romania, and Sweden. So they saw very little change. Then there is Croatia. So here you have the fixed, where the download speed almost did not change. I mean, this is very negligible. And it was the mobile network that experienced a drop. Probably that is due to the fact that network operators repurposed their networks because they saw a lot more demand than fixed. So probably they repurposed their mobile network to also serve clients on fixed network. Countries that experienced similar patterns is Austria, the Czech Republic, Estonia, and Finland, although it was less pronounced. Then there is Germany. It gets a slide of its own just because it's quite unique what happened there. So you can see this is around February 10th. The German network operators started anticipating that there's going to be a surge in network traffic demand. So they started building up reserve capacity in their networks. So you can see that the speeds are increasing here. So basically around here is when the lockdown starts. mid-March, and you can see that the expected drop does happen, but because the network operators prepared, the overall result is that network speeds were actually even a little bit higher than pre-lockdown levels. And here you can see the mobile, because on mobile networks, you didn't expect any huge behavioral change. There is no change on it. Here is what happened with Turkey. It's kind of a bit of a mix between Germany and the rest of the countries, because you can see here that the operators started also preparing. So this is mid-February, before any lockdowns were announced. They started preparing and increasing capacity, and again, this decreases once the lockdowns become a fact. And very quickly, I mean, April 6 already, the download speeds are the same like they were before. So we see very, very little impact, given what a big demographic shift was happening at the time. Some figures, rough figures. So what they did, they analyzed the percentage change from March to July. The reason that they finished in July is that by July, most of the countries had either returned to pre-lockdown levels or were doing even better. In most cases, you could see that they're doing better. For Turkey, for example, mobile was doing much better than before. So in those 4 months, they actually increased speeds by 11%. And for fixed, it's almost the same. There's almost no difference. For the world overall, there was an increase in download speeds. The second academic study that I wanted to talk to you about talks a little bit more about the behavioral patterns. First of all, an introduction from the authors. They measured the total internet traffic increase to see how big of a shift we're talking about. So this is an ISP in Europe, and I mean, if you're looking at the internet in general, there is constant traffic increase since the 90s because we're using the internet more and more. So having a traffic increase, again, is not a surprise to network operators. What was a little bit different in this situation is how quickly the increase happened. So you can see that there is about 30% increase in traffic that is happening in very short span of time. That probably gives network operators very little time compared to the status quo to react and adjust. It depends a little bit on the source that you're asking. If it's 30%, there are some ISPs that report as much as 40-45% increase in traffic. Other sources report a little bit less, maybe 15, 20, 25, but 30 is kind of like the average. They did similar analysis at internet exchange points, and you can see that the graphs kind of look similar, again, about roughly 30%. They also analyzed mobile traffic, so that's the orange line here, and you can see that mobile traffic did not increase. In fact, it decreased. Why? Because people were staying at home, so they weren't using their mobile networks as much. So this is all logical, following from the expected behavior that happened during the pandemic. They also analyzed traffic during the day. So the graph that you see in front of you, this is how internet traffic looked like on a normal, so pre-lockdown workday. So like we sleep, we don't use it very much in the early hours of the morning. And then as the workday begins, we start using internet more and more. So this is around 5 o'clock when we go home. And then once we go home, we do streaming, we do gaming. So the internet usage increases a lot. So this is during a normal pre-lockdown workday. And then this is how the weekend looks like. So that's the yellow graphs. It begins similarly. As we sleep, there is not so much usage, and then because we're not at work on the weekend, we use the internet a lot more, even throughout the the normal hours of the day. So, and then again, it peaks around the evening. So this is like a normal weekend pattern before lockdown. And so then they analyzed how the graph is on a Wednesday, so a weekday during lockdown. That's the purple one. And you can see that it looks very much like a Saturday, like a weekend during normal times. So it is kind of quite curious. They also did, they expanded the study. Let me just quickly see. No, I don't have the slide for that, but they did, they thought a machine to try to recognize which day of the week is a weekend and which is a weekday. So that's pre-COVID times. And the machine got really good at doing that, like just looking at the pattern and saying, oh, that's a weekend, or oh, that's a weekday. During lockdown, the machine was making a lot of mistakes, and basically it thought that every day of the week was a weekend. So it kind of really goes to show that our patterns of using the internet changed a lot with the lockdown. The maps that you see here, they did heat map. So what you see, this is the before the lockdown heat map. The redder the color, the hotter it is. That means that the more usage you see on the network. So for example, a lot of gaming happens in the evenings. That's not very strange. You can see that here because during work there is less of it going on. This is Saturday and Sunday, where gaming happens throughout the day, apart from the very early hours of the morning. And then on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you see it again mostly in the evenings. Email is the opposite. So email you see happening mostly in the morning. Here also mostly in the morning. Little email going on during the weekend, and again mostly in the morning. Start when the week starts. Video on demand happening again, entertainment related. This is happening mostly in the evening hours, a little bit spread out during the weekend. Social media also mostly in the weekend hours. So this is kind of like the normal way before lockdown. This is how things look like after the lockdown. So they have you see 3 months. First of all, what you see here, because you also see blue, so that's negative values. This is, they subtracted March from the base month, February. So if you have red or dark red, that means that in March you have seen a lot more than usage or network traffic than what is considered normal in February. And if you see blue, that means that in March there was less traffic of that type than in the baseline in February. In the middle and the last graph, it's the same, but for April. So when you subtract April from the baseline and June from the baseline. So what you see, just briefly looking at the graphs, you see a lot more web conferencing. And in March, it starts kind of slowly to increase, but in April and June, you see it quite a lot. What is interesting also, Saturday and Sunday, there wasn't so much increase in March, but when the lockdown was in full force, so to say, in April and in June, people started using web conferencing to also talk to their family, talk to their friends. So technology was embraced more widely. You see also increases in video on demand, in gaming a lot. Interestingly, a slight decrease in social media. Yeah, and kind of constant on traffic from education institutions. The reason is that a lot of students were connecting from home, so it is normal that we see a slight decrease there. So the conclusion from this part of my talk, we saw about 30% increase in traffic in a relatively short period of time. However, it did not result in major breakdowns. There was only very minor decrease or loss of speed and higher latency. So that is really good result for us. It's a really good message to also sent to politicians that, you know, the internet is quite resilient, and even, you know, big shocks like a 30% surge did not have a major impact on the networks. It only took about 2 months in the longest of graphs that you guys saw to return to the original speeds, and then quickly after that even proceed to increase those speeds. So in general, we feel like there was a very adequate response from the industry, and there was no need for any regulatory intervention or help. I also showed you that the traffic patterns changed quite a lot. This is I don't know, very, for me at least, very interesting to see how from a person with a technical background, an academic that is just, you know, working in computer science, can find very interesting behavioral patterns. You can basically see by analyzing the traffic what's going on with society. So we saw a large growth in web conferencing, in video, and in gaming. Which is kind of consistent with what we expected. Let me pause here for a second before I move to the last part of the talk, also to just check how much I'm doing with time. Do you guys have any questions? Yes, I see. There seems to be more gaming than education. Yeah, a lot of, I mean, and it's kind of, I mean, the sad reality, I guess, of the pandemic, that a lot of people lost their jobs. So, you know, sitting bored at home, it's kind of a natural outcome. Just to mention, I mean, these are not my I'm not part of this this research. I just really liked it, and I thought, because you're in academia, and probably some of you are thinking, should I stay and make a career out of this in university? I just wanted to show you some really cool research of what you can do if you decide to stay in university rather than go to the private sector. I see a question. Are there any upgrade in infrastructure in pandemic time due to the increase in traffic? Yes. So I mean, there is a continuous network operators increased their capacity in order to handle the increased demand. And yeah, it is great to see that they could do that relatively quickly, so that we, the rest of society, can keep on functioning. Okay, so I'm gonna move to the last part of my talk, where I'm going to, let me close down the chat so it doesn't take from the screen. I'm going to talk a little bit more about internet governance. Basically, what is that? This is the part where a lot of technical students that we give this talk to kind of get bored and leave, but I hope that you can stay with me, because as I was discussing with your professor just before we started, in a lot of political discussions that we participate or we listen to, there are not that many technical experts. And this is a problem, because a lot of time the politicians don't have the technical knowledge that you guys have. So it is very important that, you know, when you begin your career and when you advance in your career, you keep in mind that, you know, like these politicians that make the laws, that make the regulations, they kind of need you to help them and to guide them, in order not to make a policy that breaks the infrastructure on which the internet operates. But let me start. So in the next about 20-30 minutes, I'm going to talk about internet governance, the multi-stakeholder model, some main issues and dilemmas, why and how you can get involved. A little bit of background. Hisham already mentioned it a little bit, but in the beginnings of the internet, things were very different. It was basically a few universities trying to connect with each other. They knew each other and they were working towards common goals. So, you know, it's kind of like a big group of friends. They work well together, they trusted each other. So social norms worked well. What does that mean? It's kind of social norms make you kind of self-regulate in the sense that you know that if you're a bad actor and you do something to harm someone else in the group, then the group will ostracize you. They're going to maybe not allow you anymore, or you're going to suffer the negative consequences of public opinion. And so a lot of people, were acting good because of this pressure. Things have changed a lot since then. The internet is a lot more commercial, with actors with economic interests. Self-regulation still works in some cases. For example, in a group with strong community ties, I've given the example as Wikipedia, but in general, it has become a lot more difficult to police what happens on the internet. With time, this has become more and more of a problem. Internet service providers and/or platforms have tried to self-regulate. Some of them impose standards of behavior for their customers. Probably you're all aware that a lot of groups, for example, on Facebook, have terms and conditions that you have to abide by. This brings very interesting questions. Moral, ethical. So basically, who is the right person to make the decision of what is allowed and what is not allowed? So a lot of internet service providers actually say, I don't want to make these decisions. I'm not some sort of moral or ethics authority. I don't want to be the one to tell people what they can or cannot do. It's also not my job. I would like to, handle the technical details. And basically, a lot of people are of the opinion, like we have courts for that. The judge should decide what is allowed and what is not. They are the ones who interpret the law, right? But there are also a lot of examples of when self-regulation in a certain system does not always work. We cannot expect it naturally to have a good outcome. A little graph. I've given the example with the IT market. So on the one hand, we have consumers that want low prices, normal, right? If you're buying a smart thermostat for your balcony, you don't want to pay a lot of money for it. It's normal. So what do manufacturers do? They save costs on security because, let's face it, a balcony thermostat does not need to have the same level of security that a smart pacemaker would, right? Or a self-driving car. So they save costs on security in order to be able to provide their consumer with an affordable product. And so they sell it. And then you have a really nice closed ecosystem that works happily. And this is kind of, I don't want to say dangerous, but because it is closed, we, the ones on the outside, cannot expect it to change, right? Because both the consumer is happy, they get what they want. The manufacturer is happy too, they get what they want, they make a sale. What happens from this closed ecosystem is that the market, the world, gets inundated with IoT devices that have very weak or no security. So as you know, they get recruited to the so-called bot armies that they can attack networks and cause real damage on networks. So then basically we have a system that we cannot expect to change by itself, that is causing a lot of negative effects on the world around it. This is kind of the background in which people started thinking, we have to do something about this. We cannot, let this go on forever. Then internet governance was developed to address the unique challenges that the internet poses on society. I'm showing you a definition that was coined by the World Summit on Information Society in 2005 in Tunis. So internet governance, it's the development and application by governments, the private sector, and civil society in their respective roles of the shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. Now, what is very interesting in this definition, probably the most remarkable part of it is here, where you have governments, the private sector, and civil society. Because as I mentioned in my earlier talks, usually governance is done by governments. You don't have other actors, they're the ones that make the law and the rest of us in society just follows it. But this is not how the internet developed, throughout history. Well, or at least the 50 years of history that the internet had, it's been a community process. They have been, that involves all the relevant stakeholders. And this definition kind of tries to reflect that. So governments are a part of the stakeholders, but you also have the private sector and civil society that share equal responsibility and have a voice in how internet governance develops. The definition was expanded. So, and this is what we call the multi-stakeholder model. So it's still, it includes governments, national, international organizations, the private sector, and civil society, which also includes internet users. Two more stakeholder groups were added. So that's the technical community and academia. So the multi-stakeholder model refers exactly to the fact that we expect all of these stakeholder groups to have an equally valid and equally heard opinion of how policies should develop that govern the internet. Some main policy-making principles. Of course, one of the most important points is to promote the open, distributed, and interconnected nature of the internet. You have a technical background, so you already know why this is important. The internet is vastly different than other technologies that are a lot more centralized. The internet, network of networks, if one network goes down, the rest of the internet is perfectly fine. And this is one of its strengths. You cannot attack the core, so to say. It's distributed, that's what makes it agile, that's what makes it strong and difficult to attack. So we definitely, the technical community, want to keep this technical core intact in order to keep the internet as strong as it is. Next, it's very important to maintain technological neutrality. What that means is that when you're writing a policy or a rule book or whatever on how you want things to be done, talk about what you want to achieve, what is your end goal, rather than how this should happen. So, for example, if you want to protect personal data, you should state that, I want, for example, if you're writing a rule book for a hospital, I want personal data protected, or I want patient information protected, rather than prescribing, we should have encryption, or we should have such and such technology that in 2 years might no longer be valid. So the general recommendation is policies, laws, regulations should not talk about the technology in detail, rather than describe what they want done, and then it would be up to the technical experts to find the best, most efficient way at the time to address this goal. This will also kind of make it easier on politicians, because they wouldn't have to rewrite the laws every 2 years or 1 year or sometimes 6 months when a new, better technology is developed. There are a lot of other policy-making principles. On the last bullet point, you can see that there's several sources of them. I can spend a day just talking about them. If you have more interest, again, I will send the slides, check them out. So what are some of the big global, so to say, dilemmas that are happening in the internet governance world? So on the one hand, we have those who are saying that the internet is a very different communication system that is separated from geographical reality. What does that mean? It is very difficult to pinpoint which jurisdiction is in force, because I'm talking to you from the Netherlands on a computer produced who knows where, and you guys are sitting in Turkey. Your computers are produced maybe somewhere else. Maybe the traffic is going through a ton of different countries. So it is a little bit difficult to say which country, for example, which country's laws are in force or in vigor in the sessions we're having now. So this is kind of separated from geographical reality in the sense that it is it transcends the country borders. And then on the other hand, we have people who point out that actually, while all of this is true, the internet has not introduced new things to governance. Because when we're talking about our rights, our right to privacy, the right to security, freedom of expression, all of those rights have remained the same, whether we're out in the real world or whether we are online. And so those people argue that the same laws that were valid before are still in force online. So this was a very very prominent debate in the last decade, so to say. And in 2014, the United Nations declared that the same rights that people have offline should be valid online. So in a way, the world kind of leaned towards the option that you see on the right, that we are going to apply the same laws that we have to the online world. So we're not going to have to reinvent everything. And because a lot of countries recognize that we need to manage this thing, the internet, and so that is the solution that they came to. The rights that people enjoy offline are the same rights that we expect them to have online. At the same time, the internet did bring some unique challenges. So that doesn't mean that we're not going to have some more specific things looking at what is happening in the online world. However, the general rights that we enjoy, the basic ones, are something that we have defined even in the 20th century. Another big debate that is going on in the world is the centralized versus decentralized nature of the discussions. So on the one hand side, we have smaller countries and developing countries, and especially difficult for remote island nations who say that they have a limited human and financial resources to attend all of the conferences that deal with internet governance. What they would like to see is a one-stop shop for all the internet issues within one organization. On the other hand, there are countries that say that this is not the right way to do things because the internet is way too complicated to be placed under one government umbrella. So if you look at the internet, it's kind of like a horizontal, it's a horizontal phenomenon rather than a vertical industry, the way that you have the aviation industry, the banking industry, academia. Those are kind of like vertical rectangles, while the internet impacts both banking, both also aviation, also academia, also security, governance, governments, and so on. So it's a little bit difficult to put it in a vertical box because it impacts everything. So what they are proposing is to follow the multi-stakeholder model that I explained earlier, where you have different stakeholders that are affected by what is happening come together and discuss what is the best way to approach an issue. And by the way, this is something that we still discuss almost each and every internet governance conference. What is the best way to handle this? I wanted to give you some more technical examples of what things we could be discussing at such events. One example is, for example, who should be responsible for removing content. For example, there are the people who say content should not be censored at all. There's freedom of expression. They're the hardliners. Others say, you know, access providers, because they have, for them, it's the easiest to just, you know, remove a website or block their DNS. Others say, you know, content platforms should be the ones to remove illegal content, because, you know, they are kind of similar to the editors in the offline world, and they should have the legal responsibility for what they let people publish on their platforms. And others are saying, you know, it should be actually the law enforcement agencies and the courts that decide what is lawful and what is not. It is not the jobs of ISPs or of platforms to police. And if we give them the job to police, then they are more likely to err on the side of caution and remove too much content, rather than be caught in violation of something and risk, you know, shutting down their business in order not to, so they're trying to avoid, they would try to avoid this. And so they might censor too much content, even content that is in fact legal. And so there are a lot of implications from any of the choices that we pick. There is not an answer yet. We're still discussing this. So this is more like just to give you a taste. Another example is who is responsible for cyber attacks. I mean, of course, the very easy answer is the bad guys who initiate them. But when we're thinking as society, let's learn from this. Let's make sure that this doesn't happen again. People wonder, you know, like, who do we point a finger at, hey, you didn't do your job, you should do a better job in the future. A lot of people point at government, law enforcement. I have given the example of the WannaCry attacks in 2016, I think. And a lot of people were pointing to government because the NSA, the National Security Agency in the States, were actually aware of the vulnerability that was used in WannaCry years before, but they kept it a secret in order to be able to use it for their own offensive capabilities. So a lot of people were blaming them in this case for not making sure that this vulnerability, that the industry is aware of this vulnerability. Some of them were blaming the ICT industry, in this case Microsoft, because that's where the vulnerability was, for releasing software with vulnerabilities at all. But also, even later, they found out about the vulnerability. February 2016, they released a patch, but they only released the patch for some systems. There were systems that I think XP, for example, that there was no patch for. There was no patch released. So basically, all these computers, especially the ones operating in the developing countries, they were left vulnerable. Some people are blaming the CEO level at affected businesses. They're basically saying that there is not sufficient resources spent on security in businesses. So, for example, there's just not enough staff to update all the networks on time or regularly enough. And so that leaves the entire business vulnerable. And that can be, as we saw back then, very bad when we're talking about, a hospital or an airport that just nowadays really depends on connectivity. Others are blaming the IT and security departments for not deploying the patch quickly enough. Again, Microsoft released it in February, and the attacks happened in May. So for 3 months, some of those businesses had the right operating system, but they just hadn't deployed the patch. Similar when we're talking about private citizens rather than businesses. Some people are pointing the finger, like users also did not update their systems. And so there is kind of like a need for more literacy, more education surrounding security. And there are also the people that say that there's no one to blame, that it's part of life. It's impossible to release software with no vulnerabilities, for example. We should always expect that cyber attacks should happen. And what we need to prepare for is how we react once they do and how to address them. So yeah, there are different opinions. The debate is still raging. I just wanted to give you, like, again, an example of some of the topics that you might see discussed at internet governance events. Why get involved? Yeah, so the wider internet governance system is very important for the stability of the global internet. And as I already mentioned, if there are no technical people involved in the discussions on certain policies or regulations, those might not be very effective in addressing the issue at hand, and might even be dangerous and break how some of the good parts of the internet work. Why and how you can get involved? In addition to what I mentioned, regulation can affect how you run your business. So once you graduate, maybe some of you are going to go to the private sector, and then you're going to have to pay attention to, what sort of regulation or laws your government comes up with, because there might be penalties if you don't follow it. So it is important for technical experts to attend internet governance events, either in person or in online, to participate in national government consultations. So this is kind of like a chance for you, be it a private business or the average citizen who just has technical knowledge, to consult their national government and tell them, actually, have you considered that what you're thinking about can break this or that, or can be done better this and that way, or should be clarified in a certain way. We also have the RIPE Cooperation Working Group. This is the working group where we try to connect governments, but also different organizations that work in the sphere of internet governance. Anybody can subscribe to the mailing list. As I said, the archives of the mailing list are available publicly. So this is the Internet Governance Forum is the main event that gathers experts in the internet governance sphere to give them a chance to talk, to meet, to exchange ideas. In the word cloud in front of you, you can see the various topics that are occurring in these events. I'm not going to go through all of these. Again, I mean, they're entire week-long courses that you can take just to cover everything. The 2020 event had 4 pillars, amongst which the sessions were grouped. So that was data, the environment, trust, and inclusion. Those events are always free. Even the in-person, when pre-lockdown, those events were free to attend. The only cost would be the airfare and the hotels. But this year it's going to be virtual. So if you are interested in those discussions, even if you just attend like 1 or 2 sessions of the topics that you have interest in, give it a try. There are also regional internet governance forums. So there is Eurodig. The region does include Turkey. This is why I'm mentioning it here. The last year it took place 10th to 12th of June, and they had very interesting new topics surrounding the environmental sustainability of the digital revolution that is happening. And there is also CEDIG. SEE stands for Southeast Europe Dialogue on Internet Governance. This one is slightly small. So Eurodig covers Europe, the geographical Europe, so all the way to the Ural Mountain, and CIDIG covers Southeast Europe, so that's the Balkans, but also covers the Caucasus countries, so Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Ukraine. So it's like it's still a big region, but it's a sub-region of Eurodig. In that event, we can go even more in detail of challenges that our countries are facing. I'm saying our countries because I did not introduce myself, that I'm from Bulgaria originally, so I'm kind of a neighbor to you guys. So yeah, some of the new topics that we discussed at last year's CIDIG were the governance challenges of the open and decentralized internet. In 2020, you might remember one of the big topics that was going around was the proposal from Huawei for a new IP. So at that time, this was really, it was a proposal that could fundamentally change the way that the internet works and make it a centralized system. I spoke earlier about that, something we wouldn't necessarily want, that would weaken the internet's agility, because you can attack a central core, for example. But you can also do a lot of policing, so to say, from one central authority, which we would ideally like to avoid. This proposal in late 2020, it was decided not to continue with it. So it will be less of an issue this year, but this was very hot in 2020. Another topic that we were discussing is the specific challenges of depopulation in the Southeast Europe. For both of these, Ripe-NCC wrote blogs, which you can access on the links here. Let's see what else. In addition to the regional internet governance forums, there are also national ones. So these are for an even smaller audience. You can see a few of those in our service region. There is not one in Turkey. I was searching. There is a youth internet governance forum, though. So I did not list all the youth internet governance forums here because there are a lot and they change almost every year. So if you're seeing this presentation in 6 months, probably the countries would have changed. But there is one in Turkey. So if you want to take a look, go to this link. Some of the challenges, so this is, I think, my last slide on internet governance. Some of the challenges that we are currently facing in this sphere is digital sovereignty. What does that mean? A lot of countries around the globe are kind of trying and thinking, how can I make sure that what happens on the internet, on my territory, is according to my laws and regulations? So we see a push from all of the countries. I mean, a lot of people, talk about China and Russia, but actually we're seeing, push towards more digital sovereignty. For example, in the European Union, there are also proposals for that in the States. So there is growing sense in different governments that, hey, I want to kind of like take control. And that is a little bit worrying because, the internet is this thing that connects us all. And we don't want to have, different internets for the different countries. This is a situation we definitely want to avoid for the good of the world. There is lack of coherent vision on internet resources. There are different proposals on what we want to happen and how. Internet governance fora also have difficulties into attracting and keeping the interest of businesses, governments, and the technical community. As I mentioned, the multi-stakeholder model is a very different way of governing. And so for a lot of stakeholder groups, it's actually difficult to be like, should I participate in this discussion? Do they want to hear my voice? Or can I, is me participating in this discussion worthwhile? Is it going to have an impact? So a lot of these parties are still unsure, and this is relatively new. That's why it's important for technical people to be involved, to strengthen the voice of the technical community in these events. There's also lack of secure funding for internet governance events, and the UN, the United Nations, is thinking of ways to address that at the moment. One criticism that some people have towards those events is that there are no tangible results, basically, that there's no list of action points. Let's all go home and do this. Now, the reason is, there is a reason for that. When the Internet Governance Forum was thought of, people on purpose did not want to have the pressure to come up with this action point, because coming up with an action point means that you have to agree as a group on this action point, right? And so the Internet Governance Forum was, the idea behind it was, let's just get together in one room and talk. Let's just talk. Let's not have any pressure to agree, right? Because, you know, if you have the pressure to agree on something, then everybody comes with their political agendas, and, you know, like, you're trying to get it your way. Otherwise, when you go home, your boss might not like that you have not managed to, you know, impose your point of view. So the Internet Governance Forum was thought of this forum where you just come. There is no pressure for you to deliver anything. You just come and discuss and listen to the others. You try to understand their point of view. You try to understand their pressures. So yeah, it was aimed like this, very a forum with less pressure. But of course, the downside of that is a lot of people are saying, well, I don't see anything concrete. Why should I participate in this? A lot of people are concerned that the lack of tangible results means that people don't attend and they're not interested. And the last bullet point is that internet governance as a field is sometimes difficult because some of the discussions are closed doors, they're not open. And why? Especially when we're talking about economy, like e-trade, for example. I mean, this is about, when we're talking about taxes on e-trade, for example, this is a lot of money. And so governments prefer to have those discussions behind closed doors because we're talking about really massive amounts of money. So yeah, that is another challenge. So that is what I wanted to kind of share with you today. We're still wondering how the internet governance events are going to develop in the future. On the one hand, they could become even more successful with clearer outcomes, and we can attract more stakeholder groups like businesses and governments, or this might not work out. There might be not much support for the multi-stakeholder approach, and governments might prefer to do it the old-fashioned way, where they say and we do. We don't know which way it's going to go. We have to wait and see, and better participate in order to be able to influence which direction this thing goes. Here's some more information. I will share again the slides, so don't worry about copying the URLs. I just wanted to tell you, so the first one is a 40-minute video of the history. It's very interesting, very, very interesting, and it kind of lets you understand why some things today are the way they are. It's because of what happened before. If you're interested, take a look. The second link, it's a book. I have tried to talk now for about 20 minutes, but actually so much can be said about this field that people wrote a book about it. The cool thing about it, it's updated almost every year. So the examples that are listed in it, those are current examples. You're not going to be reading things that happened, in the early 2000s. You're going to read about things that happened in the last few years. So yeah, I think it's a really useful resource. This is my last slide. This is my email address. You can always write to me after the presentation. Let me see now if you have any questions. Let's see the chat. Any questions, anyone? This is my email address. One thing that I wanted to share with you, let me share my screen again. This is the RACI project funding. I will send you the URL right now. This is something that we launched 5 days ago. So we are really having this, this talk in a very timely manner. We have the RACI project, which normally funds academics, so funds their hotel, funds their accommodation to come to our meetings so that it can be completely for free for academics and they can present their research. Your graduate students, so probably most of you are doing some sort of research. If you would like to present it, and it doesn't even matter if it's completed or not, if you would like to present it, you can apply for RACI to fund the hotel and accommodation. But now that the events are virtual, we're wondering what to do with this money. What a lovely problem to have. So we have launched a call for teams in universities if they want to apply for money to work on something. We have 2 projects. So that's to apply machine learning and big data analytics to our data that we're collecting, the routing data. And the second one is for visualizations. So we want this data visualized in a nice way for the end users. And yeah, if you would like to do this work, please apply. And we have 30,000, wait, where is this? We have 30,000 euros budget to give to university teams that are interested in that. It doesn't have to be the whole 30,000, but that's the top amount. So let me stop sharing now. I will send you the link in the chat. That's what I was talking about. If you're interested, 31st of May is the deadline for proposals.
Great. Thank you very much again for your nice presentation.
Thank you. So if I don't have any questions, again, you can always email me, but I see that we're almost running out of time. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Shafiq, for facts and figures on the internet. Shafiq.
Thank you so much, Gergana. Yes, it was a really interesting presentation from you and Hisham, and thanks for you guys in Turkey to be with us for this 3 hours. So I will not take a lot of time. I will try to finish my presentation in 15 minutes and relieve you for whatever you are planning to do for the rest of the day. So let me share my screen. I believe you can see my screen now. Okay. So once again, it gives me a pleasure to be with you today. As Gergana presented in her previous slides, the ongoing coronavirus pandemic has greatly increased the internet traffic and impacted the internet connectivity. But fortunately for us, the internet held up and proven resilient despite this increasing demand for connecting. And this is really due to all the efforts that this multi-stakeholder community is doing to keep up internet up and running. So I would like to share with you in the next, I believe, 10 to 15 minutes, the origin of this increased internet traffic and how people's online activities changed and are shifting, and look at some statistics of our digital behaviors and the internet usage globally and in Turkey during COVID-19 pandemic. To start, I would like to highlight that this online has allowed families, friends to keep in touch, businesses and governments to continue functioning, students to learn, patients to access healthcare services. So all our life is now connecting to the internet. To illustrate this online shift and users' behavior, I will share with you some interesting statistics that were published by the Global Digital Report last January. So they are fresh statistics. Let's start with a look at the latest global internet headlines. So if we look at this picture on my slide, we have still seen strong growth in internet use over the past years. And the two studies that Gergana presented in Europe, because as you can see, we have around the level or the penetration of the internet in Europe is more than 90%. So every, as the statistics showed, that there is around 900,000 users per day. That means every second we have 10 new internet users. So for example, in Europe, as I said, more than 9 in 10 people across Northern and Western Europe, they are connected to the internet. But on the other side, we can see that there are 3 in 4 people, they are unconnected in Africa. And there is a lot of work to do there. So let's go and see some statistics which are really interesting, and I was surprised by these statistics. So the world's population stood at 7.83 billion. This was in January 2021. 4.6 billion people around the world are using the internet, with 7.3% since this time last year. That means there is a growth of 7.3% in internet users. The global internet penetration stands at 59.5%. That means 60% of the global population are connected to the internet. 5.22 billion people use mobile phone today, with 67% of the world total population. This is a new record where we have a growth of 1.8% since January 2020. Now, if we look at the social media, there are 4.2 billion social media users around the world. This number of social media users are equivalent to more than 53% of the world's total population. That means more than 50% of the world population are now using the social media. And if we count on the global initiatives which are led by the United Nations and other organizations like Ripe-NCC, we are trying to bridge this digital gap. So I believe we will see these numbers are growing up. Who and how we are connected to the internet? Once again, if we look at this stat, we see that mobile phones now count for roughly 56% of the time the world spent online. In the meantime, and as we can see, data shows that computers are still account for meaningful share of the world's web activity. With a growth of 4.6% compared to December in 2019, we can see that 40% of the web pages served in December were requested from laptops and desktop devices. it is interesting to see that this overall share devices is due to the lockdown. Of course, people are staying at home and they want to work and learn. So we have this number increasing and the request from the laptops and desktop devices requesting for this kind of information from the internet. We can see also that you can see that there is the same trend. We see that there is a growth in tablet with 3.3% growth. One thing that I would like to share with you that one of the statistics done by Android users, they said that the latest data reveals that applications account for 92% of the time that words Android users spend on their phones. But only 8% of these connections were requested information from browsers using mobile web browsers. That means mobile phones, even though they have a very big penetration in the market, but almost all the people are using their mobiles via applications, gaming, socialing, learning, but to reach information and to get to web browsers, laptop and desktop are still on the top. So let's look at the global daily internet usage. The average internet user now spent almost 7 hours per day using internet across all devices. So 7 hours per day across all devices. That means more than 48 hours per week online. In other words, it is a full 2 days out of the 7-day week. It's amazing. So assuming that the average person sleeps between 7 to 8 hours per day, that means we spend roughly 42% of our waking life online. And that we spend almost as much time using the internet as we do sleeping. And this is really impressive. And maybe it's the good time to review our online management time. So if we look at the chart once again, we see that the typical internet user spent 16 minutes longer online than they did in 2019. And this represents around, as you can see, 4%. As for the global social media users, analysis shows that the social media users has more than doubled since 2016. So if we look at the chart once again, we notice the big jump between 2018, where there are more than 1 billion users have been added to the global total in the past 3 years alone. So once again, welcome to the new social media world. Now, going back to Turkey, just to give you some numbers, what's happening in Turkey, and see how well connected and how was the online behavior of the Turkish people. So once again, if we look together at these stats, we see that 65 million internet users in Turkey. This was in January 2021. And the internet penetration stood at 77.7%. We can see also that 76.8 million mobile connection in Turkey, and with a penetration of 90%. As for social media, we see that in Turkey, we have around 60 million social media users. That means around 70% of the total Turkish population. What about the web traffic? In Turkey, the stat counter, looking at the graph once again, shows that 70% of web pages were requested by web browsers running on mobile phones, and only 28% requests came from laptop or desktop devices. So This is an amazing number, once again, too. Normally, no one can ignore that the mobile are now the most widely used internet devices, but the gap between mobiles and computers is often quite small, especially in Europe. But here in Turkey, it's not the case. We see that this wide gap between the usage of mobile phone and the internet. Maybe we can ask ourselves why this difference. I believe that countries and people's economic situation play a role there, and also the age of the population is also a critical driver. Another interesting number is related to the tablets. So the latest data shows that tablet computer have a significant increase in Turkey. If you look at the slide, it's 75%. And once again, I believe this is due to the lockdown and people want to stay connected, especially the students. So we have this kind of great increase. These two charts now, they show the variation in the amount of time that people in Turkey and around the world spend online. So let's look together at these two charts. I will start with the heaviest users. For example, Filipinos report spending the greatest amount of time online at an average of 11 hours per day using internet and 4 hours and 15 minutes using social media. We can see also Brazil, Colombia, and South Africa. For Turkey, if we look for Turkey, we can see that Turkish people, they spend an average of 8 hours on the internet. We can say you are an active online users with 1 hour more than the global average. The global average is at 6 hours and 54 minutes. And for social media, you are using social media at an average of almost 3 hours per day, which is more than around 30 minutes from the global average. But if we go to the end of the scale, we can see that Japanese report spending at the minimum amount of time online, which is 4 hours and a half per day. And they spend less than 1 hour on social media. So our friend, the Japanese, they are serious people and they have no time to waste. But if you see the variation from 1 hour to 11 hours, it's really interesting. And if you have time, it's nice if you can go and look to this statistics and study to see how it looks from different perspectives. So why the reason why people are actually doing online? First, we can see finding information is the main reason why people go online, with almost 2/3 of the world interest users saying this one is of their top motivation. The second one is staying in touch with family and friends, which is making perfect sense as we are locked down. And the list goes on and on. And I go back to the gaming. Yes, gaming is it's ranking in the 8th place. So people are using online for gaming too. So these are the top reasons why people are going online. I will not go through it. As I said, I will keep it short so I can review 15 minutes. I still have 1 minute. Maybe I will do it. Just one thing that this data clearly shows that the people's behavior are and prefer, sorry. So this data shows that people behaviors and preferences vary depending on many criteria, such as geographic locations, education, age, lifestyle, and other criteria. So we can't compare people's why they are doing this and why they are staying online and for which purposes. But this is, as I said, it's a general stat on the global internet usage. With all these numbers, challenges remain. So first challenge is we need to connect the unconnected. As the COVID-19 pandemic rages on, the internet continues to provide a lifeline. So it's more important than ever to keep people connected. I give you one example that I crossed over. More than 1 billion people remain unconnected across just 3 countries. You know the 3 countries are India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So in these 3 countries, we still have 1 billion people to be connected. There is a need both to develop internet infrastructure and to close the digital divide. So working with others who share our goals, at Ripe-NCC, we'll continue working for a more stable and resilient internet and connect the unconnected. And just, I want to highlight, I believe Hisham and Gergana highlighted this, that at Ripe-NCC, we do capacity buildings for organizations, for students, for community, for the Ripe community. So by supporting these individuals and organizations with the technical expertise, we can help you in developing your infrastructure and help governments in developing their policies and regulations. My last slide, as a conclusion, despite these impressive figures and despite the ongoing impact of coronavirus pandemic, that's really increased and put pressure on internet hold up and proven resilient. As I said, it's a effort done by all the community, from the end user to the government. And this is why, as Gergana said, multi-stakeholder is a really important environment to work with to keep internet safe and resilient. Thank you so much. I'm happy to receive any questions. Thank you, Gergana. I will leave the floor for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Shafiq. Any questions for Shafiq or for me? I see that Hisham had to leave for another meeting, but maybe we can answer.
Yeah, thank you very much for all these nice presentations. That was a very fruitful day for us. Presentations and the information that you have provided us were great. Thank you very much again for your contributions. If there are questions, I just try to see in the chat window.
I see predictions for the future, Shafiq.
I did my best to finish in 15 minutes because I know it's 3 hours online is too much for you guys.
Yes.
So.
I see that Gamze is asking, Shafiq, if you have any predictions for the future.
Prediction for the future. I believe with the Internet of Things, with artificial intelligence, no one can predict what will happen in the future. But from positive, as I am a positive thinking person, I believe, yes, we are going more for a digital world. We are going more to see more services, more e-learning, more e-society. So yes, let's keep it open for all these innovations.
I will send you, by the way, Ertan, I will send you all the links that we posted on the chat in an email. If you want, share them with the students.
Yeah, I'll do so. Thank you very much.
And I will
post as well on the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
That's good.
So don't worry, you guys. You will have the links if you want more information. So, well, thank you very much for listening. As Shafiq said, 3 hours is a long time to.
But it was a great day. Thank you very much again for your whole time and the presentations. Great.
Thank you for inviting us and for making this possible.
Great day. Thank you.
Shafiq, thank you very much.
Thank you for you. And thanks for you guys who stayed with us.
All right. Have a lovely day.
Bye-bye.
See you.